Chapter 878. Li gently poked the little fellow's soft face and said, "If you want to call me mother, there's no little. Mother, the two words he said were not clear. They were vague and could barely be distinguished. A 6-month-old child, even if he was gifted or had been guided early, could only say a few more words. It was unlikely that he would understand the meaning. Li guessed that apart from Rui, Xiao Huan was the one who spent the most time with him. She had heard so much that when she forced herself to say it, she would naturally be confused. However, in this way, who was the winner or Rui? In detail, Xiaonyang was also a mother, so Rui was a little better. When he returned home, the proud Lolita had already come over. She bounced out of the yard and asked, "Sir, where did you and Sister Rui go?" The little fellow stretched out her hand from Rui's arms and said vaguely, "Little Mother." Li remembered that when he made the bet with Rui, the proud Lolita was the referee, so she was the one to announce the final result. The proud and pampered Lolita's eyes spun as she said, "But little Duan, didn't call out, father or mother." Sir and big sister Rui didn't win. Li pinched her face and asked, "Neither of us won, so who won?" "If neither of us won, then of course the referee won." The proud Lolita said seriously, "So, sir, you have to promise me one thing. What is it?" As soon as Li said it, he felt that something was wrong. How could there be a referee in a match? However, the proud Lolita didn't give him a chance to change his words. She said with a smile, "I haven't thought about it yet. I'll tell you when I've thought about it." She seemed to be afraid that Li would go back on his words, so she ran away quickly after saying that. Rui looked at him, smiled, and said, "Since my husband didn't lose, then the agreement between me and my husband." Li waved his hand and said righteously, "Lil mother is also a mother, so it's still my wife who wins." Walking on the street with the incognito eldest princess and looking at the orderly Jingdo, Li turned his head and asked, "How has the emperor been these 2 days?" Mingzi shook her head and said, "It's better than before, but I'm still resting in bed most of the time." Li didn't know how to continue this topic. The old emperor's health was deteriorating year by year. Even Li himself wasn't confident. A few carriages slowly approached from the front. Li and she moved back a little. Looking at the carriages slowly moving away, Li murmured, "These carriages look a little familiar." Mingzi turned her head to look and said calmly, "An envoy from the Qi kingdom." Li asked in surprise, why did the Qi kingdom send an envoy here again? From what he remembered, ever since the third prince of the Qi kingdom had caused a ruckus in the Jingdo, the envoy from the Qi kingdom had returned. Later on, the friction between the two countries intensified. Even now, there were still occasional disputes on the border. What was the purpose of the Qi kingdom sending an envoy here again at this time? To negotiate for peace. Mingzi looked at the bustling crowd in front of them and said, "The emperor of the Qi kingdom is seriously ill. I'm afraid he doesn't have much time left. The eldest prince and the third prince of the Qi kingdom are locked in a fierce struggle for the throne. The court is also divided into 2 factions that are evenly matched. This time, the envoy from the Qi kingdom has come to the capital on behalf of the eldest prince to negotiate for peace with us. The eldest prince is the crown prince of the Qi kingdom. Even if the Qi kingdom doesn't value the eldest son as much as other countries, the eldest prince has, after all, entered the East Palace. He's the heir apparent in name. There's no lack of support in the court. Why would he need our help?" At this delicate moment, the eldest prince had sent an envoy to negotiate for peace. Naturally, it wasn't just to negotiate for peace. It was likely that he wanted to borrow some power from the Jing kingdom to deal with the third prince. For the crown prince to end up like this, it was truly tragic. Mingzi glanced at him and said, "Originally, it was indeed like this. Although the third prince of the Qi kingdom has a reputation for being virtuous, he's still the third prince. He doesn't have a legitimate title. However, not long ago, the crown prince of the Qi kingdom turned the entire Qi kingdom into a mess. The people's grievances rose everywhere and the hearts of the people were shaken. Many in the court were disappointed in him and turned to support the third prince. That's why the two of them are evenly matched now. It seems, there's such a thing. Li nodded and said, "What did the court officials say?" Mingzu shook her head and said, "They only revealed their intention to negotiate for peace. They haven't formally proposed it yet. My imperial father's health isn't good. He hasn't summoned them these few days. I'm afraid they'll have to wait until my imperial father's next court session." Li Yi didn't have much of an opinion on the matter of negotiating for peace. However, from this matter, he could feel the changes in the Jing kingdom over the past 1 or 2 years. He could still remember when he first came to the capital. The carriage driven by the envoy of the Qi kingdom still dared to run amok on the busy streets of the capital. In just 2 short years, the envoy no longer had that kind of arrogance and despotism. He was even more restrained than some of the nobles in the capital. However, when he left the Qi kingdom, he didn't hear anything about the emperor of the Qi kingdom. Could it be that the saying "Yinghua guards his heart" was really true? It was just that the person Yinghua was guarding was not the old emperor, but the one in the Qi kingdom. He wasn't so free that he would even worry about the affairs of the Qi kingdom, so he didn't ask more. This time, the princess went out incognito to see the suffering of the people. At the same time, she also went home to get a meal and spar with Mississippi Lu. In the last few spars, Mississippi Lu had always been slightly better. She was usually busy with political affairs, so it was impossible for her to practice martial arts every day like Mississippi Lu. Occasionally, she would spar with him. Perhaps she had even learned something from it and progressed quickly. Of course, in this way, the eldest princess had lost both in person and in spirit. Although compared to before, the gap between the two had shrunk a lot. After drinking too much soup, the effect was naturally not as obvious. In front of Mississippi Lu, it would be difficult for her to raise her chest in this lifetime. Mingzu casually pointed to the front and said, "In front is the government office of the capital. Let's go in and take a look." Li Yi nodded. He hadn't seen County Magistrate Lu for a long time. He didn't know if the hurdle in his heart had been crossed or not. "You too, what grievances do you have? Don't be anxious. Speak one by one." Sitting in the hall, Jingdo Magistrate Lu Dio gently tapped the gavel and pointed to the 2 people below. An old man below replied, "Sir, my daughter went to the river to wash clothes yesterday morning and has not returned yet." Hearing this, Lu Dio furrowed his brows and looked at the other person. He asked, "What about you? Why did you report the case?" The man's expression was sorrowful as he said, "My lord, this commoner's wife returned to her parents' home 3 days ago and hasn't returned since. This morning, this commoner went to her in-laws' home to inquire, but they said that they had never seen her. My lord, you must uphold justice for this commoner. 2 more have gone missing." Lu Dio's brows furrowed even more. In 1 month, there had been over 10 women who had mysteriously disappeared. He was about to open his mouth to ask more details when his eyes flickered and his body suddenly shook. He quickly walked out and bowed. "Greetings, Your Highness, Sir Li." Prime Minister Qin walked out of the door and said to an elegant young man, "After you go back, help me bring a message to the Grand Tutor. Tell him that in 2 days, I will come to visit him." "I will certainly bring the message." Chu Ping bowed and said, "I will remember Prime Minister Qin's teachings. I will take my leave today." Prime Minister Qin nodded and said, "Qin Yu, go see Chu Ping off." Qin Yu walked forward and extended his hand. "Brother Chu, please." Chu Ping looked at him and smiled. "Thank you, Brother Qin Yu." Chu Ping walked first and Qin Yu followed behind him. His footsteps were very slow because the young man in front of him seemed to have trouble moving his feet. His steps were deep and shallow, and his pace was also very slow. Prime Minister Qin watched the 2 of them leave and slightly shook his head. The 2 of them were of the same age, but one of them spent all day visiting the great scholars and learned scholars in the capital, seeking knowledge and dispelling doubts. The other person was a playboy that everyone in the capital hated. In the garden, the large man glanced outside and asked, "Who is that person?" "These past few months, he has been coming to our house every few days, the successor of Grand Tutor Chu. He is thirsty for knowledge and is indeed different from those playboys." The middle-aged man's gaze looked in the direction that the young man disappeared in and slowly said. The large man nodded and said, "He looks all right. but his legs are not very nimble. The middle-aged man's gaze was still looking in that direction. After a long time, he withdrew his gaze and looked at the large man. "You've been by my side for 2 years, the large man scratched his head and said, I forgot, but it seems so, 2 years is not a short time. The middle-aged man sighed and stood up. He looked at the large man and said, there is an important matter that I need you to do. The large man revealed a puzzled expression. What is it? The middle-aged man waved his hand and the large man moved his ear closer. Fifth master, don't worry. Leave this matter to me. There will be no problem. After a moment, the large man's face revealed an excited expression. After patting his chest, he quickly left. The middle-aged man watched him leave. After a long time, he sat down again and took a sip of tea. He muttered, it has already been 2 years. Chapter 879. In the Yamen, Emingzu frowned and asked, within a month, there have been more than a dozen cases of women and girls going missing near the capital? Lu Dio nodded and said, since the first case a month ago, including the 2 today, there have been 13 cases. The security in the capital had always been good, and there were countless heroes of the martial arts world among the people. There were very few major cases. After the first few cases of women going missing, he didn't pay too much attention. But now, there were a total of 13 cases. As a small magistrate of the capital, he would soon be unable to handle it. Although the court had repeatedly banned the trafficking of women and children, there were still people who dared to do it under the feet of the emperor of Jingdo. Li Mingzhu looked at the 2 people in the hall, whose faces were full of sorrow, and turned her head to ask, have you found any clues? Lu Dio shook his head and said, I have sent people to investigate many places, and even had the constables stand guard at night. But the thief is very careful and doesn't commit the crime in the same place. Until now, there have been no clues. What did Lu Yizhi say? Li Yi thought for a moment and looked at him and asked, has the case been submitted to the Ministry of Justice? Lu Dio shook his head again. Assistant Minister Lu is busy with work and has a few major cases on hand. I think that if it is not necessary, it is better not to give him trouble. Li Yi nodded and waved his hand, go and bring the files of these cases over. Hearing this, Lu Dio was delighted. He had already seen official Li's ability when he was in Qing and Prefecture. Seeing that the advisor next to him was still in a daze, he kicked him and hurriedly said, hurry and bring those files over. Then he looked at Li Yi and Zhang, eldest princess, and said, Your Highness, officially, please go to the back hall. In the back hall of the Yamen, Emingzu saw Li Yi flipping through the files without saying a word. She couldn't help but ask, did you find anything? Don't worry. Do you think I'm the reincarnation of Lord Bao? Li Yi flipped through the files and turned his head. Lord Lu, please bring me a map of the vicinity of the capital. County Magistrate Lu was more reliable and didn't have as many questions as Princess Royal. Without saying anything, he quickly asked someone to take out a detailed map. February 13th, Yang Village. Li Yi looked back at County Magistrate Lu and asked, where is Yang Village? County Magistrate Lu casually pointed to a place above, and Li Yi drew a circle at that location. Li Yi flipped open another scroll, 16th of February, Wei Village. Where is Wei Village? County Magistrate Lu pointed. Here. At this moment, he had already understood Li Yi's meaning. Even if he didn't know what Li Yi was going to do, he still took the initiative to mark the locations of the missing women on those files. Seeing Li Yi begin to connect those marked small circles with lines, a big net immediately appeared on the map. After that, County Magistrate Lu circled the place with the densest lines on the net. If he still didn't understand what Li Yi was doing, he wouldn't have been able to sit in the position of the magistrate of the capital for so long. With admiration on his face, he immediately bowed and said, Thank you for your advice, officially. Li Yi put down the pen, waved his hand, pointed at the big circle drawn at the end, and said, Send people to visit this place secretly. Be careful not to be discovered and alert the enemy. If you find something, don't act rashly. These people have committed crimes repeatedly without being discovered, so they can't be ordinary people. At that time, the Secret Intelligence Office will cooperate with you. Since he had encountered this matter, he could only do it conveniently. That was all he could do. Walking out of the county government, the eldest princess shook her head and said, "There are people who are so bold in the territory of the emperor. If we are far away from the capital, I don't know how chaotic it will be. Where there are people, there are evil. The great harmony of the world is just an ideal. It's already amazing to make the world seem peaceful on the surface." Li Yi turned his head to look at her and said, "Miss, work hard." There was no obvious change in the expression on Mingzhu's face. When he sent her to the gate of the palace, he suddenly said, "Don't forget what day it is the day after tomorrow." "What day is the day after tomorrow?" Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. He, who had been traumatized by this, couldn't help but tremble when he heard similar words again. Last time, Mississippi Lu told him not to forget what day it was 7 days later. He racked his brains but couldn't remember it. It was not Rui's birthday, not her birthday, not Xiao Huan's birthday, and not even the 3rd anniversary of their meeting. He had been on tenterhooks for a whole day. He used a roundabout strategy to ask Xiao Huan and found out that his birthday was 7 days later. He had been very depressed about this. How could there be such a strange question in the world? He asked tentatively, "Is it 2 years, 7 months, and how many days?" Seeing that the expression on her face became confused, he immediately changed his words, "No, that's your birthday. No, your birthday just passed." Seeing her frown, a light flashed in Li Yi's mind. He suddenly said, "I remember. The day after tomorrow is the first day of your menstruation. Remember to drink more water and rest more. Don't get tired. Put aside the affairs of the court for now and let the people below do it." And Mingzhu looked at him and said calmly, "The day after tomorrow is the first day of the first day." Li Yi thought for a while and said with certainty, "Last month was also the first day of the first day." And Mingzhu said lightly, "On the first day of the first day, you have to go to the morning court. Father specially said that there is only one morning court every month. You won't die if you get up 2 hours earlier." Ah. Li Yi just remembered that in the past few months, if the old emperor was not so sick that he couldn't get out of bed, he would still go to the morning court in person on the first day of the month. "Oh, I see. I have to go to the morning court on the first day of the month." Li Yi nodded. When he turned to walk back, he turned back and said, "However, you still have to remember to rest more." In a room of the Qin family, the big man said apologetically, "Fifth Lord, I'm sorry. I can't do that." The middle-aged man looked up at her and asked, "Why?" The big man sighed and said helplessly, "That girl was taken away by the yamen. I don't dare to stop the people from the yamen." The middle-aged man stood up and asked slowly, "Which yamen?" "The capital magistrate's office." The big man said angrily, "The people from the capital magistrate's office are too despicable. That girl's sister died some time ago, and she went to the yamen to complain. She was arrested and locked up for 2 months. She was only released for 4 hours, and then she was taken back again. They said that she stole something from the magistrate. Isn't this nonsense?" "Fifth Lord, I'm sorry, I couldn't protect her. She stole something from the magistrate and was arrested again." The middle-aged man murmured and sat down slowly. After a long time, he waved his hand and said, "It's okay, it's not your fault." The big man asked curiously, "Fifth Lord, who is the girl you asked me to protect?" The middle-aged man sighed and said, "She is a pitiful person." The big man nodded repeatedly, "She's quite pitiful. Why don't those officials have any sympathy?" The middle-aged man waved his hand casually, "You can leave first." The big man responded, retreated to the door, and closed it. The middle-aged man lowered his head. After a long time, a smile appeared on his face, and he murmured, "Tsing Shichen, Tsing Shichen." Chapter 880. The morning court of the Jing kingdom had long been reduced to a mere formality. There were 3 provinces and 6 ministries to maintain the operation of the imperial court. In fact, there was no need for an emperor. Some important decisions could not be decided by the subordinates, and the eldest princess would be the judge. If even the eldest princess could not make a decision, she would have to ask the old emperor for his opinion. On the first day of every month, the ceremonial morning court would be held. If there was nothing very important, the old emperor would only show up for a short while. Her Highness the Princess, who assisted the government, sat on the lower left side of the old emperor to distinguish her status. But now, the position where Li Yi stood in the court could no longer be leaned against the pillar. His position was only behind the two prime ministers, and was equal to the ministers of the 6 ministries. Listening to the reports of the officials in the court, Lin Mingye felt a little sleepy. Suddenly, he heard the sharp and thin voice of a eunuch. Summon the envoy of the Qi kingdom for an audience. These days, the envoy of the Qi kingdom had been very well behaved in the capital city. He was so well behaved that he did not seem to be the envoy of the Qi kingdom. But according to the rumors they revealed, this time they came to seek peace. It was normal for them to be well behaved. The envoy of the Qi kingdom stepped into the main hall. After standing still, he bowed and said in a loud voice, "Greetings, Your Majesty." The envoy of the Qi kingdom had a proper attitude and a humble expression, which made the officials of the Jing kingdom feel refreshed. Because of the great power of the Qi kingdom, even when the envoy was sent in the past, his attitude was extremely arrogant in the presence of the emperor and ministers of the Jing kingdom. Compared with his attitude now, it was like the difference between cloud and mud. And the reason for all these changes was very clear in their hearts. The Qi kingdom and the Zhao kingdom had repeatedly invaded the border. Each time, they were beaten back by the generals and soldiers of the Jing kingdom. After losing several cities, the Zhao kingdom finally calmed down and quietly retreated. The envoy who was sent to discuss the redemption of those cities was still hanging in the office of the Chamberlain of Dependencies. The envoys of the Qi kingdom got straight to the point. After a few ceremonial words, they went straight to the point. The gist of it was that the Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom were neighbors. How many people would die and how much money would be wasted if they were to fight each other all the time? How much money would be wasted? How about the two kingdoms shake hands and make peace from now on? They would respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, not invade each other's territory, and not interfere with each other's internal affairs. They would be equal and mutually beneficial, and they would coexist peacefully. As soon as he said this, not only did Emperor Jing stand up from his throne, but the court was also in an uproar. The biggest foreign threat of the Jing kingdom was the Qi kingdom. The two kingdoms had been fighting for decades, and the Jing kingdom was the weaker one. Over the past decades, the Qi kingdom had asked for peace several times, paying a heavy price for it. This time, it was the Qi kingdom's turn to ask for peace. This was the first time. As the subjects of the Jing kingdom, their hearts were filled with a sense of belonging and pride. Had the Jing kingdom of today grown to the point that even the Qi kingdom dared not underestimate it? Without waiting for the subjects of the Jing kingdom to say anything, the leader of the envoys bowed and stepped forward. He said in a loud voice, "To show our sincerity, on behalf of the crown prince of the Qi kingdom, we ask His Majesty the Emperor to marry the eldest princess of your kingdom. We also promise that after the crown prince ascends to the throne, we will immediately confer the title of imperial concubine to Her Highness." As soon as he said this, the court, which had been a little noisy, immediately quieted down. Someone was startled for a moment, then frowned. Some people were stunned at first, and then their faces showed a look of wild joy. Li Yi looked at the envoy who was holding the letter of credence from the Qi kingdom, then raised his head to look up. The old emperor frowned. Her Highness the Princess was expressionless. She retracted her gaze, and there was not much change in her expression. Someone immediately stepped forward and said bluntly, "Your Majesty, we can negotiate for peace, but the crown prince of the Qi kingdom must never marry the eldest princess." "I second the motion. I second the motion." As soon as Prime Minister Qin said this, many people in the court stepped forward. The Qi kingdom taking the initiative to negotiate for peace was, of course, a very honorable thing to do. If word of this got out, it would raise the prestige of the kingdom. But for the crown prince of the Qi kingdom to marry the eldest princess, it would be a fool's dream. The importance of Her Highness the Princess to the Jing kingdom was self-evident. It could even be said that although she was a princess, she played the role of a monarch. Moreover, she was a wise monarch that was rarely seen in decades. Without Her Highness the Princess, what would become of the imperial court of the Jing Kingdom? Normal people would not do such a thing to give such a wise monarch to the Qi Kingdom for nothing. As for negotiating for peace, the Qi Kingdom did not want to discuss it. After all, they could not defeat the soldiers of the Jing Kingdom who had celestial punishment. In short, peace could not be discussed, but marrying the princess was out of the question. Cui Qingming looked at the old man who stepped forward. His expression was calm, but his fists were tightly clenched in his sleeves. He tilted his head to look, and an official stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, if the two countries go to war, how many people will be plunged into misery and suffering? How many brave soldiers of the Jing Kingdom will be sacrificed? Now that the Qi Kingdom has proposed to negotiate for peace, it is a blessing for the people. I hope that Your Majesty will reconsider." After this official spoke, many people stepped forward to agree. Both sides stuck to their own views and argued endlessly. Emperor Jing put down the letter of credence and pressed his hand down. The imperial court immediately returned to silence. "We can negotiate for peace, but don't mention the marriage proposal again," he said plainly, showing his most obvious attitude. The envoy of the Qi Kingdom raised his head and said, "Negotiating for peace is a matter that benefits both countries. The Qi Kingdom has shown enough sincerity. Your country should also show some sincerity, right?" As soon as he said this, all the officials in the imperial court looked at the envoy of the Qi Kingdom with unfriendly gazes. The envoy of the Qi Kingdom was implying that if the Jing Kingdom did not marry the eldest princess to the Jing Kingdom and did not show enough sincerity, then there was no need to discuss the peace. "Your Majesty, this matter is beneficial to the people. Please reconsider. Your Majesty, don't let the people be plunged into misery and suffering again. Your Majesty, please think of the people of the Jing Kingdom and the soldiers at the front line." When a few more people stepped forward, Emperor Jing frowned and looked at a certain place below. Li Yi stepped forward at the right time and looked at those people. He asked, "Accepting the Qi Kingdom's negotiation for peace and marrying the eldest princess to the Jing Kingdom is to save millions of people and prevent the people from being plunged into misery and suffering?" The leader of the group scoffed coldly and said, "If it can prevent the war between the two countries, why not? Then, in the end, can it be avoided?" Li Yi looked at him and then at the people around him. He asked again, "The Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom have negotiated for peace so many times. Did they really achieve what this lord said?" The official was speechless. If negotiating for peace was really useful, it would have been enough to negotiate for peace once. The envoy of the Qi Kingdom would not have appeared in the hall now. Li Yi looked at the courtiers in the hall and said, "Everyone knows that the Qi Kingdom has the heart of a tiger and a wolf. They have abandoned the treaty more than once. What credibility do they have? Moreover, Your Majesty is ill and the eldest princess is assisting you in ruling the country. This is a critical time. How can you marry the Qi Kingdom? Moreover, the crown prince of the Qi Kingdom has lost the support of the people and may not even be able to sit on the throne. What right do you have to make such a promise?" "Ha, you're right, you're right." Old General Shui laughed and walked out. He said, "Sincerity? What sincerity do you want? Do you want Tianfa?" Another old general walked out and laughed. He said, "The Qi Kingdom is the invader. What's there to talk about negotiating for peace? If you want to retreat, do it quickly. If you want to fight, the soldiers of the Jing Kingdom will not be afraid of you." Prime Minister Shen stood out and nodded. He said, "Your Majesty, I think Dr. Li is right." The Minister of War, Yan Bing, stepped forward and said, "I agree." The Minister of Revenue, Qin Huan, stood beside him. "I agree." The Minister of Left Minister, Dong Wenyun, those who stepped forward were all important courtiers in the imperial court. The two prime ministers had the same opinion. The Shen family and the Wang family were also standing behind Jin Ziguanglu. The opinions of others were actually insignificant. Cui Qingming looked at the row of people standing in front of him. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug deep into his palms. Soon, he loosened his fists helplessly. Regarding the negotiation for peace with the envoy of the Qi kingdom, the opinions of the big shots in the imperial court were unanimous. Peace could be negotiated, but marrying the eldest princess was out of the question. If it worked, they could negotiate. If it didn't work, they could get out. The Qi kingdom was still the Qi kingdom of the past. But the Jing kingdom was no longer the weak Jing kingdom of the past. Li Yi ate a mouthful of egg fried rice. He looked at the eldest princess and said, "You are right. The negotiation for peace with the envoy of the Qi kingdom is fake. They want to use this opportunity to get the help of the Jing kingdom to help the eldest prince ascend the throne." Mingzu held the wine cup, but she didn't eat. She didn't seem to be in a good mood. She looked at him and asked, "What do you think about the peace marriage?" Li Yi thought for a while and said, "Peace marriage. Discord is moral integrity. Peace is also a diplomatic method. As for how I think about it, it can't be generalized. This is what you usually use to fool father." Mingzu swirled the wine cup and said, "I want to listen to your heart." Heart. Li Yi raised his wine cup and clinked it with her. He said without hesitation, "I don't care if it's the Qi kingdom or the Zhao kingdom. Of course, I won't let you marry them." Chapter 881. The emperor and ministers of the Jing kingdom had firmly rejected the proposal of the envoy from the Qi kingdom. There was no hesitation, which meant that there was no room for negotiation. The eldest princess was not only the eldest princess. She also knew many secrets of the Jing kingdom, including Tianfa, which could not be known to outsiders. These secrets could never be leaked to the Qi kingdom. Not to mention that the current situation in the court depended on the princess. Without the eldest princess, the construction of the academy would come to a standstill. The implementation of the marriage policy would also encounter huge obstacles. The envoy from the Qi kingdom did not propose any more peace talks. The morning court session ended on bad terms. After returning to the office of the Grand Herald, he was not in a hurry to leave, as if he still had a glimmer of hope. As the current leader of the Cui family, Cui Qingming's face darkened the moment he stepped out of the palace. The envoy from the Qi kingdom is seeking peace with the intention of marrying the eldest princess. This is an opportunity that we cannot miss. We cannot let it go like this. After hearing the news, a man from the Cui family walked out anxiously and said hurriedly, "Li Yi, this kid, has already grown up." Cui Qingming pressed his palm heavily on the table and murmured, "You didn't see the scene in the court today. Just relying on the remaining power of our Cui family in the court is no longer enough to contend against him." But as soon as the man spoke, someone hurried in and said, "There is news from the palace. Her ladyship sent a message." Cui Qingming stood up and looked at the lady official who walked into the room with everyone else. The lady official glanced at Cui Qingming and the others. There was no expression on her face. She said calmly, "Her ladyship asked me to ask you, Lord Cui, what are you waiting for?" Cui Qingming clenched his fists. After a while, he nodded and said, "Tell her ladyship that I know what to do." The 6-month-old Li Duan was already restless. Although he could not walk, he could already turn over on his own. He could even walk when supported by an adult. Li Yi planned to build a carriage for the child to learn how to walk. It should be ready in 2 months at most. Mingzu Li is going to be married off to the Qi kingdom? When he was sketching in the room, Mississippi Lu suddenly walked in and asked out of the blue. Li Yi raised his head to look at her, then lowered his head and asked casually, "Who told you that?" Mississippi Lu walked over and took a look. She stood aside and said, "It's just a rumor." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Don't worry, she won't marry anyone who marries to the Qi kingdom. Even if she wants to, she can't. No one in the imperial court will agree to it." Mississippi Lu crossed her arms and murmured, "A 19-year-old princess should have married long ago." Li Yi raised his head and looked at her in surprise. "If I remember correctly, you seem to be a few days older than her, right?" Mississippi Lu turned to look at him and nodded. "You're right. So, what are you trying to say?" "I told you, my memory can't be wrong." Li Yi lowered his head and continued to draw the blueprint. He murmured, "It's good that she's older, it's good that she's older." After drawing the blueprint, the next thing to do was to make and polish it. The finished product still needed to be tested and adjusted, but these could be left to the craftsman. If it wasn't for Mississippi Lou's reminder, Li wouldn't have realized that she was already 19 years old. Even Xiao Huan had crossed the threshold of 17 years old. She was much more sensible and was about to become a young lady. Only that Tsundere Lolita was still the same as when they first met. It seemed that she hadn't changed at all. She was still as playful as before. She could even play with the 6-month-old Li Duan. This also saved her and Rui a lot of trouble. Li walked into the room and saw the little fellow lying on his back on the bed. The Tsundere Lolita was lying by the bed, blinking her big eyes and looking curiously at the even smaller thing in the little fellow's split pants. Finally, at a certain moment, she couldn't help but reach out and pull it. County Magistrate Lu supported his chin with one hand. There was a thick file in front of him, but his mind wasn't on it. His eyes were blurred. His upper and lower eyelids touched each other and quickly opened again. In the past month, more than 10 cases of missing women had attracted the attention of the higher-ups. They had strictly ordered him to solve the cases within a time limit. However, a few days had passed, and there was no news of those thieves. He hadn't slept for a day and a night since last night. "Your Excellency, good news, good news." Seeing a yamen runner running in from outside with a face full of surprise, County Magistrate Lu quivered. He immediately stood up and asked, "Is there any progress in the case?" The yamen runner shook his head and said, "It's the young master's appointment. The young master has been hired by the Ministry of Revenue." County Magistrate Lu waved his hand weakly. The officials of the Ministry of Revenue had already discussed this matter with him. After that good-for-nothing boy entered the mathematics college, he was enlightened and graduated with excellent grades. He didn't lose face for County Magistrate Lu. This time, he went to the Ministry of Revenue to temper himself, so he didn't need to worry about his future anymore. He waved his hand and said, "I see. You can go now." He was so sleepy that he lay on the table and planned to rest for a while. Not long after he closed his eyes, a thunderous voice rang in his ears again. "Your Excellency, good news." County Magistrate Lu patted the table and didn't even bother to open his eyes. He said, "Okay, I see. You can go now. I'll sleep for a while." After lying on the table and closing his eyes for a while, he felt a little refreshed. He picked up the file and was about to read it. Seeing that the yamen runner was still standing below, he asked, "Anything else?" "Your Excellency, what should we do next?" County Magistrate Lu frowned and said, "What next?" "Detective Zhao has found some clues about the missing woman. He came back to ask you for your opinion. When did you find it?" County Magistrate Lu suddenly stood up from his seat and asked, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" The yamen runner was stunned and said, "Didn't you say that you already knew?" County Magistrate Lu had been worried about this matter these days. There was progress in the case, but they didn't tell him immediately. What if, during this period of time, something happened? He glared at the yamen runner and said, gritting his teeth, "Say it." The yamen runner trembled and immediately said, "Thanks to your guidance, we followed your method and narrowed the scope of the secret investigation. As expected, we found some problems in a place outside the city. Great scholar Sun has studied scriptures all his life. Although he isn't as good as Qin Wen, he still has unique insights in some aspects. He is far away from the downtown area and lives in a hut outside the city. It took you a lot of effort to find him. Go now." Chu Ping bowed respectfully and said, "I'll take my leave." Ping-er's leg. Watching Chu Ping limp away, the middle-aged man stood beside Grand Tutor Chu and sighed. That's a human life, a living human life. Grand Tutor Chu watched Chu Ping leave and shook his head. And he only injured one of his legs from kneeling. I only hope that he can remember this lesson and not repeat the same mistake. The middle-aged man nodded and said, he has been studying wholeheartedly these days. He has always been aware of his mistakes and has the intention to change. As soon as he finished speaking, a servant from the Chu family came to report that Chui Qingming from the Chui family had come to visit. Chapter 882. Grand Tutor, the Qi Kingdom has taken the initiative to seek peace. This has never happened since the founding of the country. Once we stop fighting the Qi Kingdom, our Jing Kingdom will be able to take this opportunity to recuperate and grow stronger. In the Chu household, Cui Qingming's face was full of excitement, but it suddenly turned fierce. But that scoundrel harbors evil intentions and has bewitched His Majesty. Even Prime Minister Qin and Prime Minister Shen, the old generals, and many important ministers have been deceived by his flowery words. If we miss this golden opportunity, our losses will be immeasurable. Grand Tutor Chu sat in his seat with a calm expression. When Cui Qingming finished speaking, he looked at him and said calmly, "In my life, I have seen the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom seek peace 3 times. In the end, the way of the world is still the way of the world. There is always war ahead, and the Qi Kingdom's wild ambition will never be satisfied, but the weak have never had the right to negotiate. The enmity between the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom cannot be resolved with a peace treaty. The situation in the Qi Kingdom is chaotic now. We only need to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. There is no need to interfere. Moreover, a crown prince of the Qi Kingdom who has not ascended the throne cannot represent the Qi Kingdom. But I know what to do. You need not say more." Grand Tutor Chu picked up the teacup on the table. It was clear that he was sending the guest off. Cui Qingming swallowed the words he wanted to say. His expression returned to normal. He slowly rose and said, "This junior bids his farewell." He walked out of the hall and walked back the way he came. Just as he was about to step out of the Chu household's gate, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. "Brother Cui, Brother Cui." A middle-aged man caught up with him and said, "My father has been in a bad mood these days. If he has said anything overboard, I hope Brother Cui will not take it to heart." "How could that be?" Cui Qingming smiled and said, "Grand Tutor has always been like this. How could I not know? Today, Grand Tutor's words have enlightened me. There are some things that I need to carefully think about." The middle-aged man was relieved. That's good, that's good." At the Chu family's entrance, Cui Qingming looked up at the nation's literary bones plaque. After a long while, he turned around and boarded the carriage. The coachman leaned against the carriage and lifted the curtain slightly. He whispered, "Second master, the Yaman's people seem to have found that place." Cui Qingming frowned. "So fast?" The man nodded and said, "Today, the constables sent by the government are already 5 miles away from that place. I'm afraid they will find us soon. We have to move as soon as possible." Cui Qingming lifted the curtains of the window and looked in the direction of the Chu family again. He leaned against the carriage and said faintly, "If they want to investigate, then let them. Go to the capital governor's manor." The coachman lowered the curtain and said in a low voice, "I understand, outside the capital, in a certain village, in front of the grass at the village entrance." Chu Ping bowed slightly to the white-haired old man in front of him. "Many thanks to Great Scholar Sunday. Today, with Great Scholar Sun's guidance, Chu Ping has benefited greatly. The younger generation will surpass us in time. The younger generation will surpass us in time. We are old now. The future belongs to you young people." The old man stroked his white beard and said, "Send my regards to the Grand Tutor. I will pay a visit another day. I bid you farewell, elder. I won't be sending you off." Chu Ping walked all the way to the village entrance. There were already people waiting there. A well-dressed young man stretched out his hand and pointed at the carriage beside him. He smiled and said, "Master Chu, please." On a high hill outside the village, a constable was lying in the grass. He put away the cylindrical object in front of him and furrowed his brows. They had been following that carriage all day, but from the logo on it, it belonged to a small noble family in the capital. This matter was a bit troublesome to deal with. He turned his head and said in a low voice, "Keep a close watch here. I will go back and report to the master." At the same time, in the capital governor's manor, Tsing Shichen put down his teacup and looked at Cui Qingming. "You don't have to worry about that woman. To prevent her from causing trouble outside, I have already locked her up in prison. As long as we find a reason, she can be locked up like this. Cui Qingming nodded and said, the matter I mentioned just now, don't worry. I will also have people keep a close eye on that place. There won't be any delays. This matter is very important. I will leave it to Brother Tseng. Tseng Shichen looked at him and said solemnly, Brother Cui can rest assured that I will handle this matter. Bide your time. Li Yi crumpled a piece of paper into a ball and threw it into the lake. He didn't quite understand the 4 words that Tseng Shichen had sent him. The arrival of the Qi Kingdom's envoy to the capital was a great opportunity that couldn't be more obvious. Inciting public opinion, colluding with the court officials to force the abdication of the throne, pressuring the emperor, and so on. With a whole set of gifts, the Cui family and their accomplices were almost finished. But if others didn't make a move, it wouldn't be good for him to make the first move. In this way, Lord Tsing's words of bide your time seemed a little out of the blue. He didn't finish his words, and this half was unclear and vague, which was really annoying. Her Royal Highness threw a stone at the lake, leaving a long mark on the surface of the lake. It flew to the other side and disappeared. She asked casually, this time, what other reason can they think of? Li Yi imitated her and threw a stone. The stone sank into the lake with a thud. I don't know. He shook his head and thought for a moment. Suddenly, he said, why don't we be a little more ruthless? And Mingzhu looked at him and asked, how ruthless? Li Yi pointed at the ripples on the surface of the lake and said, take advantage of the quiet night, when the moon is dark and the wind is strong, and send a few masters to kidnap Cui Qingze, Cui Qingming, and a few other important figures of the Cui family, and then? Li Yi threw another stone into the lake. Mingzhu looked at the ripples on the surface of the lake and asked, what if Grand Tutor Chu stands out and opposes? Another thump came from the surface of the lake. Noble Consort Cui? Thud. What about all the opposing officials in the court and all the people in the world? Then forget it. Li Yi shook his head and lay on the lawn with his hands behind his head. He sighed and said, in this way, the fish in this lake can't be eaten in the future. Therefore, this kind of thing couldn't be rushed. Her side still had to take the righteous side, and basically could only rely on the other side to court death. This was very passive and not easy. As a friend, he did this for her. If she didn't reward him with a very, very high official title in the future, even the heavens wouldn't be able to bear it. Mingzi knew that he was just joking. She imitated him and lay on the lawn with her hands behind her head, looking at the blue sky. At this moment, all the heavy court affairs seemed to be completely erased from her mind like the cloudless sky. Li Yi turned sideways and was about to say something. His mouth opened halfway and his whole body froze. When she lay on the lawn with her hands behind her head, the clothes on her chest tightened, revealing a seductive curve. The two of them were very close to each other. Because of the perspective, at this moment, Li Yi couldn't tell who was the winner between her and Mississippi Lu. In the small pavilion in the lake, Li Xian sighed. He always felt that there was something between Li Yi and Mingzhu that he didn't know besides the love between a man and a woman. Unfortunately, the two of them denied it every time. He couldn't get any useful information from either of them. Beside him, the proud Lolita held her chin with her hands and looked in the same direction as him. She also sighed slowly. Chapter 883. What happened to the Peng family? Hearing Detective Zhao's words, County Magistrate Lu frowned and said, he's just a county magistrate. How can he handle such a big thing? Detective Zhao asked tentatively, then I'll take some people to the Peng family now. Wait a minute. County Magistrate Lu waved his hand and said, don't rush. Don't alert the enemy before there is conclusive evidence. A small noble was still a noble with a title of nobility. If it was the Peng family, it would be fine. Not to mention a county magistrate, even a duke would not be able to handle it. But if it was not the Peng family, it would be really troublesome to frame a noble for no reason. While he was thinking about it, a runner suddenly came to report that people from the capital government had arrived. County Magistrate Lu looked up and saw the leading official. He cupped his hands and said, Lord Han. Lord Lu. Lord Han cupped his hands and returned the greeting. Then he asked directly, "Is there any progress in the case of the missing girls?" County Magistrate Lu looked at him and nodded. He said, "There is some progress. We can almost determine where those girls were taken." "That's good." The man showed a hint of joy on his face and said, "Our superiors are pressing us, and the government is also under great pressure. Since you have found it, you should take action immediately and close the case as soon as possible, so as not to cause more trouble." County Magistrate Lu frowned and said, "But this case involves a county magistrate." Lord Han waved his hand and said, "So what? He is a county magistrate. He has committed such a heinous crime, and he can't escape the punishment of the law." He turned around and waved to a runner. "Go to the government and get more people here. Today, I will make sure that none of them can escape." County Magistrate Lu saw this and said no more. It was also a good thing for them to close the case earlier. The two governments took action at the same time. Naturally, the battle formation could be described as mighty. The constables of the government were in front, and the county magistrate followed. They quickly went out of the city gate. "Everyone, spread out. Don't gather together. Surround the Peng family from all sides." Lord Han said that no one can escape today. After the leader gave the order, everyone immediately dispersed. In a manor somewhere outside the capital, the guards at the entrance stood lazily, chatting with each other. "Say, who do you think went in just now? To think that the second young master would personally accompany him. Who knows?" One of them shook his head and said, "But it must be a big shot in the city." "Why do you think these big shots? Maybe those big shots like this. They've tried all kinds of things. It's inevitable that they want to try something new." "Don't you think so?" the person on the left said, but didn't get an immediate response from the person next to him. When he turned his head, he saw a knife pressed against the person's neck. A look of terror appeared on his face, and he was just about to scream when he felt a cold sensation on his neck. "Don't talk. Lead the way." As the cold voice fell, there were noisy footsteps in the surroundings. The two Yamans had sent out dozens of bailiffs for this serious case. Although the Peng family had many guards and servants, they didn't dare to resist the officials. How could they resist? In a short period of time, everyone was chased into the courtyard. A few bailiffs entered the inner courtyard and kicked open a door. When they saw the injured woman tied up in the room, their faces were filled with anger. "Put her down first," the leader of the bailiffs said. Immediately, two bailiffs walked over, untied the woman, and wrapped her in a blanket. Inside the room, the naked man was so scared that he couldn't even speak properly. He said in a trembling voice, What are you doing?" The bailiffs picked up the whip beside him and whipped him in the face. He said angrily, "Put him on and take him away." At the same time, the sound of doors being kicked open could be heard from every room in the inner courtyard. In the corner, a few bailiffs kicked open the door and rushed in. When they saw the man in the room, they were startled and blurted out, "Young Master Chu, why, it's you again." Chu Ping looked back and threw the burning candle in his hand to the ground. He looked at the door indifferently. The bailiff's expression changed and immediately said, "Quick, close the door." The case of the missing women that had attracted a lot of attention in the capital had finally been solved. After the women were kidnapped, they were forced into prostitution by the Peng family just to satisfy some perverted animal desires. When the Yamen bailiffs found the Peng family, there were still many people in the room who were doing the beastly things. They were caught on the spot and put on black hoods. They were stuffed into carriages and sent to the Yamen. The abused women were immediately sent to the Women's Medical Center for treatment. Watching the carriages leave, one bailiff said indignantly, "We were the ones who worked hard these days." In the end, the credit was taken by the Yamen. "Why? Shut up." Someone beside him tugged at his arm and said, "Are you blind? Those people who were brought out just now are clearly not ordinary people. Do you think our master would be willing to do something like this?" The bailiffs came to his senses. When he walked through a few rooms, he saw a few familiar faces. They were clearly some of the foppish young masters who often appeared in the capital. His master really couldn't afford to offend the powers behind these people. He clenched his fists tightly, but in the end, he could only sigh and say, "Damn it, I still don't feel good." The banquet at the Chu family had already begun. The middle-aged man looked at the empty seat below and said in confusion, "Strange, it's already so late. Why hasn't Ping returned yet?" Grand Tutor Chu said calmly, "There are many things about Sun Zhongxiu that he can learn from. It's fine for him to come back later." The middle-aged man nodded and said, "Ping has been working much harder than before." Just as he finished speaking, a servant ran in frantically and said in fear, "Master, there's a letter from the capital Yamen. Something big has happened, something big has happened." The middle-aged man frowned and said, "Just what happened? Tell me slowly." The servant handed over a piece of paper. After the middle-aged man finished reading it, he suddenly stood up from his seat and flipped over his chair. The dining table also shook violently. Soup splattered everywhere and countless chopsticks fell to the ground. His face was pale. He gripped the paper tightly and murmured, unfilial son, unfilial son." Grand Tutor Chu slowly stood up and looked at him. He said, "Give me the letter." The middle-aged man held the letter and a hint of hesitation appeared on his face. "Give me the letter," Grand Tutor Chu repeated. Hearing this, the middle-aged man could only respectfully hand over the letter. Grand Tutor Chu took the letter. At first, his expression was rather calm. However, not long after, his breathing began to quicken and he gripped the letter tightly. His eyes were bloodshot and his beard was trembling incessantly. The middle-aged man hurriedly walked over and gently patted his back. He said hurriedly, Father, calm down, calm down. Don't be angry and harm your health, bastard. The descendants of the Chu family have been upright for generations. How could we have produced such a bastard?" After a sorrowful voice, the middle-aged man cried out anxiously, Father. Someone, quickly go get a doctor." Chapter 884. That bastard, where is that bastard now? Grand Tutor Chu had already woken up before the doctor arrived and asked in a trembling voice. The servant replied in a trembling voice, "The magistrate's office said that they did not reveal young master's identity. They should be sending young master home soon." As soon as he finished speaking, a servant announced that Lord Zheng and Lord Shui had come to visit. In the distance, a few figures walked over. At the very front were two middle-aged men, and behind them was Chu Ping, who was limping over. "Lord Grand Tutor, kneel." Chui Qingming had just opened his mouth when he was shocked by the furious Lord Grand Tutor and swallowed the words he wanted to say. Plop. Chu Ping was expressionless as he knelt on the bluestone. "Bastard, how did our Chu family produce such a bastard like you?" Grand Tutor Chu's expression was somewhat ferocious as he raised his walking stick and fiercely struck Chu Ping's shoulder. "This old man will beat you to death today so that my Chu family's ancestors won't be humiliated." Chu Ping's body swayed, but he did not dodge. A cold smile appeared on his face as he said, "Then beat me to death. I'm a cripple anyway. It's a stain on the Chu clan's reputation. It's better if I die. Death is the end of all troubles." Grand Tutor Chu was stunned as he looked at the grandson he had raised since he was a child. He found that after only a few months, he actually did not recognize him. He raised his walking stick but did not lower it for a long time. He murmured, "My Chu family has 100 years of good reputation, 100 years of good reputation, 100 years of good reputation." A bitter smile appeared on Chu Ping's face. "Yes, 100 years of good reputation. As long as you beat me to death, the Chu family will still be the Chu family. The Chu family that is praised by everyone will not lose 100 years of good reputation." He stretched his head out and smiled, "Come, grandfather, I'm ready." Grand Tutor Chu looked at him, his body trembling. The walking stick in his hand could not be lowered. Ping, he put down his walking stick and bent down, using his withered hands to caress Chu Ping's face. His old eyes were filled with tears as he said in a trembling voice, "Ping, how did you become like this? Chu Ping didn't reply. A pained expression appeared on his face, and he closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were devoid of emotion. He stood up from the ground, and without giving Grand Tutor Chu another glance, he limped back inside. The middle-aged man behind Grand Tutor Chu stepped forward, looked at Tsing Shichen, and asked anxiously, "Lord Tsing, what is going on?" Tsing Shichen shook his head and said, "Today, the magistrate's office received news that many cases of women going missing in recent days were committed by the Peng family of Pingan County. They kidnapped these women and forced them into prostitution in order to satisfy some perverted hobbies of some guests. When the constables broke the door and entered, they happened to see Chu Ping inside." The middle-aged man still had some disbelief and muttered, "This is impossible, this is impossible. Didn't Ping go to visit Great Scholar Sun? Didn't he go ask Great Scholar Sun for guidance? How could he, Brother Chu? Young people will inevitably make mistakes." Cui Qingming waved his hand and said, "Even the king of Shu was temporarily expelled from the capital by His Majesty because of a small mistake made by a young man. Nephew Chu Ping is still young. Although he has followed the Grand Tutor through thousands of mountains and rivers, he has truly experienced too little and is easily tempted by external things. In the future, with strict discipline, he will definitely correct his mistakes and become good again." The middle-aged man sighed and said, "I will have to trouble Brother Cui with this matter." Cui Qingming smiled and said, "Brother Chu, do not worry. No one knows that Chu Ping is also involved in this matter. As for other obstacles, Lord Tsing will also help clear them away, just like last time. Thank you, Brother Cui." The middle-aged man said, then turned his head to look at Grand Tutor Chu and said, "Father, I will go see Ping." After seeing the middle-aged man leave, Cui Qingming took a step forward and said, "Grand Tutor, Chu Ping is still young. It is inevitable that he will make mistakes. Don't be angry." Bang! Cui Qingming held his head as fresh blood flowed down his forehead. He stared in a daze at Grand Tutor Chu and said with some disbelief, "Grand Tutor, you, Cui Qingming." Grand Tutor Chu's eyes were bloodshot. He used his walking stick to point at him from a distance and said, "My eyes can't see clearly. Do you think my heart is also blind?" Cui Qingming held his head and looked at Grand Tutor Chu. After a long time, the shock on his face disappeared. With a calm expression, he said, "What is Grand Tutor saying? Why can't I understand?" Grand Tutor Chu threw his walking stick to the ground and glanced at him with a cold gaze. In a cold voice, he said, "Get out. It seems that I have outsmarted myself." As the two of them walked out of the Chu household, Tsing Shichen looked at Cui Qingming and said in a small voice, "How can this be considered as outsmarting myself?" The wound on Cui Qingming's head was no longer bleeding. However, there was still a lot of blood on his face. When he smiled, he looked rather ferocious and terrifying. Tsing Shichen shook his head and asked, "From the looks of it, Grand Tutor probably already knows that you are behind all this. Will he still help the Cui family and His Highness the King of Shu?" "He is not helping the Cui family, nor is he helping His Highness the King of Shu." Cui Qingming wiped the blood off his head and said, "He is helping the Chu family." Tsing Shichen looked at him and said, "Hand over Chu Ping and the Chu family will still be the Chu family." Cui Qingming shook his head and said, "Before today, hand over Chu Ping and the Chu family will still be the Chu family. After today, the Chu family's reputation for 100 years will be in our hands. As for the choice, Grand Tutor is a smart man. He will know what to do." "Father, what should we do?" In the dark great hall, the person in charge of the Chu family on the surface walked in and looked at the figure in the depths of the darkness. After a long time, a hoarse voice came from the darkness. "How is Ping, He has already fallen asleep," the middle-aged man replied. No sound came from the darkness. I was wrong from the very beginning." After a long time, a sigh came from the darkness. The old man muttered, "I didn't expect the Cui family to be so vicious. Those are living human lives, living human beings." The middle-aged man looked at him in a daze, his face filled with disbelief. Father, you mean, they have already destroyed Ping, and now they want to destroy our Chu family. The old man slowly turned his head and looked at the ancestral tablets of the Chu family in the darkness. He muttered, they want to destroy the reputation that our Chu family has built up over generations. The middle-aged man's body trembled as he said anxiously, Father, you mustn't. You mustn't. The Chu family's reputation for 100 years must not be destroyed in our hands. He gritted his teeth and said with great difficulty, if it really doesn't work, then hand over Ping, Grand Tutor Chu shook his head and said, after they sent Ping, back twice, this is no longer Ping's problem. The middle-aged man took a few steps back and muttered, could it be that our Chu family? Grand Tutor Chu lit the candles in the room and straightened his clothes. He said, make preparations. In a few days, I will be meeting a few old friends. Chapter 885. Li Yi learned from the Princess Royal that the case of the missing women had been solved. He didn't expect that a powerful person could do such a crazy thing. He turned to look at her and asked, how are those women now? Mingzu shook her head and said, they are still recuperating in the medical center. It's not difficult to heal their physical injuries, but it's their hearts. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, after such a thing happened, they must have a hard time in the future. Instead of being gossiped about, it's better to find a job for them in your place, so that they won't be looked down upon in the future. He had heard about the situation that day. No one expected that the crazy Ping family kidnapped those women just to satisfy some people's perverted desire. The death of the head of the Ping family was not to be regretted, but how could those women who were physically and mentally injured live a normal life in the future? It was a big problem. Mingzi nodded and said, I know this. What are you going to do with the playboys caught by the Ping family and them? Li Yi looked at her and asked. According to the law, the head of the Ping family should be beheaded. Several important accomplices will not be able to keep their lives. Although the other people's crimes are relatively light, they cannot avoid being exiled for 1,000 miles. As for those playboys, the lightest punishment will be exile. Li Mingzhu stood up and said, however, there are still 2 women that we have not found. Li Yi frowned slightly and asked, haven't found them? Mingzhu shook her head and said, the Ping family confessed to the crimes they committed and told the details of the case, but they denied that they had kidnapped the 2 women. The servants of the Ping family have also interrogated them one by one, and then conducted a thorough search of the Ping family, but they also didn't find any clues related to the 2 women. Li Yi was surprised and said, could it be that there is someone else involved in the case of the 2 women? I've already sent people to continue the investigation. Mingzhu looked at him and thought of another matter and said, the Ministry of Justice has already handed over the case of the Zheng family. Lord Zheng was indeed wronged, but the main culprit died on the way to exile, so his family couldn't find him or pursue the matter. The court can give some compensation to the Zheng family and Miss Zheng. Li Yi waved his hand and said, since they're dead, there's no point in pursuing the matter. Compensation, forget it. But since they were wronged, it's not too much to overturn the case and give justice to the Zheng family, right? Mingzhu looked at him and nodded and said, of course. Li Yi cupped his fists at her. Thanks for the matter with the Zheng family. Li Mingzhu looked at him and asked, this thank you, are you saying it yourself, or on behalf of Miss Zheng? Is there a difference? Mingzhu thought about it for a moment and nodded. Li Mingzhu pondered for a moment and nodded. That's right. There's really no difference between the 2 of you. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, although it's an unjust case, without you, I wouldn't have been able to get the court to admit the mistake. If it's Miss Zheng, the court has wronged her, so she doesn't need to thank me. Mingzhu looked at Li Yi calmly and said, if it's you, if it's me, I won't say it. Li Yi waved his hand and said, between us, you should be the one thanking me. And if you really want to thank me, I'm afraid you won't be able to finish it in your lifetime. Mingzhu crossed her arms in front of her chest and murmured, there's still a long lifetime. Li Yi looked over. At this moment, he suddenly had the urge to call Mississippi Lu over and stand shoulder to shoulder with her. That way, it would be clear who won and who lost. When Li Yi saw Mississippi Lu, she was reading in her room. Mississippi Lu was reading a book. This was a phenomenon even rarer than the Antares guarding the heart. Other than those secret scrolls that only had pictures but no words, Li Yi had never seen her seriously read any book. Although Mississippi Lu was literate, she didn't know much. There were even 2 words in the green jade case that she didn't know. It was hard to imagine how she would remember to read something like the Analects of Confucius. She held the book in her hands and seemed to have encountered something she couldn't understand. Her brows furrowed and she quickly flipped through a few pages. Then, she quickly turned back and looked at it again and again. Finally, she grabbed the book impatiently and waved her hand. Only then did a relaxed expression appear on her face. Li Yi took the book that Mississippi Lu had thrown out the door and walked into the room to put it back. He asked, "Why are you reading this kind of book?" Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, "I'm just flipping through it casually." Li Yi knew that she was definitely not flipping through it casually, because on the table in her room, in addition to the Analects of Confucius, there were 2 other books, such as The Great University and The Doctrine of the Mean. At the very front was the latest edition of the Mingyue collection, which was compiled by those busybodies after sorting out the poems that he had thrown out. Since the Lantern Festival, the number of pages of this poetry collection had increased by 1. In addition to this book, there was also a thick notes on the Mingyue collection. He flipped through it casually and found that there were 17 or 18 notes on each poem. Those people really had nothing better to do. Mississippi Lu looked at the thick notes in his hand and raised her head to ask, "In your heart, is that Miss Zoyamo really so perfect that you would praise her with more than a dozen poems?" There was no way to answer this question. At that time, the relationship between the 2 of them was still a pure relationship between a man and a woman. He had only given her these poems because he wanted to help her. He had never thought so much, but now, it seemed that every single one of them was a naked love poem. When these heavyweight poems were released, they praised her to the point that she was rare in the heavens and hard to find in the mortal world, like a fairy. Then, the other fairy seemed to be a little unhappy. "Hey, you've changed your perfume today. What's the smell? It smells quite nice." Li Yi changed the topic without any trace. Mississippi Lu did not answer, and the atmosphere was a little awkward. "Well, I heard the news about Yangliuking in the palace today." Li Yi spoke again. He looked at her and asked, "Do you want to hear it?" "Not interested." Mississippi Lu said lightly, and then said, "But if you really want to tell me, I can reluctantly listen." "I don't really want to say it." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Read your book first, I'll call you when it's time to eat." Instead of learning the good things, he actually learned to be arrogant from the Tsundere Lolita. The Tsundere Lolita was only arrogant now, but she became arrogant and reluctantly listened. When he walked to the door, Mississippi Lu's voice came again, "How about, before we eat, I reluctantly teach you a few more moves?" Li Yi turned around and walked back. He said, "I feel that I've advanced too quickly recently. It's better to stabilize it, so I won't learn anything new." Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, "About her, what did Emingzu say to you?" Speaking of the princess, Li Yi thought of something. He looked at her and said, "There's no rush for this. A few days ago, Sue taught me 2 moves. One of them, I haven't figured out yet." Mississippi Lu's face showed a look of interest. "Which move?" Li Yi crossed his arms and said, "You first do what I do." A look of doubt appeared on Mississippi Lu's pretty face, but she still copied him and crossed her arms. She asked, "And then?" "That's it." Li Yi looked her up and down. He shook his head for the Princess Royal and said, "Just now, I suddenly figured it out." Chapter 886. The situation in the Wu Kingdom is different from ours. The current emperor of the Wu Kingdom killed his brother and father. He didn't get the throne with a proper reason and didn't win the hearts of the people. He was despised by the scholars in the Wu Kingdom. Although he used force to clean up some of them, the whole Wu Kingdom was in great turmoil. Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu and said slowly, "Today, more than half of the places in the Wu Kingdom are out of the control of the imperial court. Among them, there are forces loyal to the former emperor of the Wu Kingdom, and there are bandits who took advantage of the chaos. In short, the Wu Kingdom is in a mess, very messy. Princess Tuanrong, who disappeared mysteriously after the Emperor of the Wu Kingdom seized power, returned to the Wu Kingdom a year ago. She gathered a few generals who rebelled against the current imperial court and also gathered a considerable force. They cleaned up the bandits who occupied the mountains and made themselves kings, and at the same time strengthened their force to fight against the imperial court. Li looked into her eyes and said, "You don't have to worry too much. There are many people around your apprentice now. Although it's not possible to overthrow the entire imperial court, they can still protect themselves." "I see." Mississippi Lu nodded and turned to walk outside. "Where are you going?" Li asked hurriedly. Although she didn't show anything in the past year, Mississippi Lu only taught her one precious apprentice with all her heart. How could she not care about her? If she were in the Wu Kingdom now, she would have already led the masters of the Lu League to break into the imperial palace and take the head of the emperor of the Wu Kingdom. Mississippi Lu turned around and said, "I'll go ask Chief Su what tricks he taught you 2 days ago." Li Yi's expression changed. This was more dangerous than her breaking into the imperial palace. He quickly walked in front of her and changed the topic. "Rui, do you remember the Taoist who followed us back from the Qi Kingdom?" "Of course I remember." Mississippi Lu glanced at him. She had only met a few grandmasters. How could she forget? "I heard from Su that the Taoist priest was about the same age as Su, but he looked like he was 2 generations younger than Su." "Do you know why?" Mississippi Lu pursed her lips and said, "That's nothing. Taoist Kung Fu focuses on maintaining one's health. It has a certain effect of prolonging one's life and retaining one's youthfulness. That Taoist must be practicing a top-notch youth-retaining technique." "I heard from my father before." As she said this, she seemed to recall something from the past. Her tone paused and her face darkened slightly. He was about the same age as Su, but he looked so young. Li Yi had been eyeing old Taoist Yuan for a long time. His interest was immediately piqued and he hurriedly asked, "What? What did our father say?" "Mississippi." Lu came back to her senses. She glared at him and said, "Who's with our father? What you said isn't right." Li Yi looked at her and explained, "You and Rui are sisters. Your father is Rui's father. I'm Rui's husband. Rui's father is my father. In this way, your father is my father. Besides, we're a family." Mississippi Lu did not argue with him. She waved her hand and interrupted him. "My father used to say, our father." Li Yi corrected her again. In the past, our father said that he had seen a Taoist priest who had cultivated the Taoist technique of retaining one's youth to the extreme. He had already lived for 60 years, but he still had the face of a young man. His appearance would not change until he died. Speaking of this, Mississippi Lu did not care at all. She changed the topic and said, "However, although this kung fu can maintain one's appearance, it doesn't help martial arts much. It also needs to buy all kinds of precious medicinal materials. Not to mention the time and effort it takes, the silver alone is not something ordinary people can afford. It's just a useless kung fu." Li Yi said indifferently, "We're not ordinary people. It's not a big deal to spend more money." Mississippi Lu frowned and said, "The silver is not the point. The point is that it's a waste of time. It's better to use it to learn some practical kung fu." Li Yi shook his head and said, "You can't say that. Rui, you're 19 years old this year. It's the most beautiful time of a woman's life. But can you guarantee that you'll still look like this in 10 or 20 years? Let's not talk about other things. In a few years, although you'll keep practicing kung fu and your figure won't change, wrinkles will appear on your face. Your skin will become loose and lose its luster. In a few years you'll be old and your pearls will turn yellow." "Old and pearls turn yellow?" Mississippi Lu looked at him. Li Yi could hear the cracking of his knuckles. "Pretend I didn't say anything." Li Yi turned his head and walked away. As he walked, he said, "If you think it's useless, then forget it. I'll let Rui practice. I'll let Xiao Huan practice too. By then, you'll be the only one." Mississippi Lu leaped slightly and appeared in front of Li Yi. She asked calmly, "What if I'm the only one?" Li Yi walked around her and said softly, "Only you can experience the complete life of a woman. As a woman, who wouldn't want to remain young and beautiful forever?" However, there was a price to pay for everything. Using a large amount of time to cultivate the Taoist's youthful but useless technique of retaining one's looks would affect one's martial arts path. But if she didn't learn it, her sister and Xiao Huan could keep their looks. After a few years, she would be the only one who would become old and withered. This was naturally something she couldn't tolerate. Mississippi Lu clenched her fists and looked at Li Yi, who was about to slip out of the door. She said in a low voice, "Come back." Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, "Taoism's Kung Fu has never been taught to outsiders. Not to mention this kind of top-notch art of retaining youth. That Taoist Yuan is a grandmaster and has a high position in Taoism. Are you sure you can handle him?" Li Yi smiled and looked straight at her. He said, "In this world, there's no one I can't handle." He could even handle a monk, let alone a Taoist. Although those people had no desires and only wanted to cultivate, it didn't mean they didn't care about anything. A few Taoist canons that didn't exist in this world pointed them to a few more paths of cultivation. It was just a useless secret manual. How could Taoist Yuan be reluctant to give it to them? With one more Taoist scripture, he would be able to impart all of his years of experience in practicing this technique. With one more book, he would have a consultant who would be at his beck and call in the future. With one more book, in order to prevent Mississippi Lu from aging so early, Li Yi's hands were sore. "Take it." He tossed 2 booklets to her. One of them recorded the youth retaining technique, and the other recorded the insights and experiences of old Taoist Yuan and the seniors of their sect when they cultivated this technique. It would allow people to take fewer detours when cultivating. Although Taoist Yuan wouldn't give him a fake one out of respect for the Lord of Tao and virtue, it was necessary to let Rui and second great-uncle examine it first. After watching Mississippi Lu go to Rui's room, he sat down at the stone table in the courtyard. He took out a few pieces of paper from his sleeve and opened them one by one. In the end, the Chui family couldn't sit still. This time, they had to be wary of not only the Chui family, but also the Chu family. Ever since Grand Tutor Chu had returned to the capital, he had spent most of his time in seclusion. But recently, he had frequently visited the famous Confucian scholars near the capital. No one knew what they had talked about, but the scholars of the capital had frequently gathered and there had been many movements. In the end, the Chu family still made a move. Even though they were already mentally prepared, they still felt a little complicated when it happened. Her Royal Highness was already very famous among the scholars in the world, but if they didn't target the princess, Grand Tutor Chu, Li Yi crumpled all the papers into a ball and sighed softly. Mississippi Lu walked out of the room and looked at him. "Oh yes, there's one more thing. I asked, but Chief Su said he didn't teach you any techniques." "Ah, he didn't?" Li Yi looked surprised. After a while, he nodded and said, "Oh, if he didn't, then he didn't. Maybe I remembered wrongly." Chapter 887. In the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Li Yi was cracking melon seeds. Occasionally, he would throw a few melon seeds into the lake to attract a few fish. The proud Lolita, with her sharp eyes and quick hands, caught them with a small net. She then quickly ran to her private courtyard and put them in a transparent fish tank. When only the 2 of them were left in the pavilion, Li Mingzhu stood up from the stone bench and said slowly, "Grand Tutor Chu has been going around these days. He has gathered some influential scholars and encouraged the scholars in the capital and the vicinity of the capital to write a letter to ask Father to recall the King of Shu from Shuzhou and have him enter the Eastern Palace to preside over the court." "What did His Majesty say?" Li Yi had already peeled a plate of melon seeds. He picked up the plate and gestured to her. Her Royal Highness took the plate and gathered all the melon seeds that he had spent a long time peeling into her hands. Li Yi secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva and wondered if he had expressed the wrong intention just now. When he handed the plate to her, he clearly wanted her to pinch a few seeds as a gesture. The princess ate all the melon seeds in a way that made Li Yi envious. Then she said, "Father has not expressed his opinion, but this matter has greatly affected the scholars in the capital. It is not a long-term solution to leave it like this. Moreover, Grand Tutor Chu has already begun to visit some officials in the court. It should be for this matter. Many of those people were his students. After all, they have a righteous cause, and Grand Tutor Chu has personally come forward. I'm afraid, the same method used by the Chui family and Grand Tutor Chu had a completely different effect. After all, the latter was simply the benchmark in the hearts of the scholars of the Jing kingdom. With a casual wave of his hand, countless people would echo him. There were peaches and plums all over the world. To be precise, the old emperor was also one of those peaches and plums. Grand Tutor Chu's influence in the Jing kingdom could no longer be described as 100 people at a single call. If it weren't for the fact that the king of Shu had made such a grave mistake, which could be described as a bastard or a rebellion, he wouldn't even need to make such a big fuss. All he had to do was stand out and make his stand clear. Naturally, countless people would follow him. But then again, Li Yi also felt that the old emperor treated the king of Shu and the Chui family differently from the other princes. It was even somewhat out of line with his usual style of doing things. They had been monarch and minister, or friends for so long, and there was a tacit understanding between the Chui family and the king of Shu. Don't worry. You know His Majesty's temperament. Li Yi smiled and said, what he has decided is not so easy to change. The Tsundere Loli had already released the fish, washed her hands, and ran over. As soon as she entered the pavilion, she asked Li Yi, Sir, where are the melon seeds you peeled for me? I want to eat them all at once. Then she saw the empty plate on the table. Sir. She pouted and looked at Li Yi with an aggrieved expression. Li Yi looked at Mingzu, and the proud Lolita followed his gaze to look at Mingzu. Mingzu stared blankly at Li Yi, and the proud Lolita's gaze shifted to him again. Sir, Li Yi helplessly pinched her face and said, okay. I'll peel more for you right away. On a grassy slope across the lake, a figure crawling there finally put down the binoculars in his hands. Something's wrong indeed. Li Xian hung the binoculars around his neck and slid down the slope. Through many long-distance observations, he could already confirm that Mingzu and Li Yi did not have the kind of relationship that he had always thought. They were using this relationship to cover up something that they did not want him to know. What was it that made Mingzu willing to put down her reputation? The fire of curiosity in his heart burned even more intensely. On the way back to the Academy of Sciences, he ordered a guard behind him. Bring me the person from yesterday. The guard responded. Not long after, a skinny old man was brought in. After walking into the room, the old man immediately bowed respectfully. This commoner greets your highness. Dispense with the formalities. Li Xian waved his hand and looked at him. He asked suspiciously, you said that you can guess what other people are saying by looking at their lips? The old man immediately said, Your Highness, this commoner has studied lip reading for decades. Although I can't say that I can guess everything correctly, I can roughly guess it. Teach me. Li Xian looked at him and said, Didn't you want to pass down your unique skill? I'll leave a place for you in the Academy of Sciences. The old man was stunned. He immediately knelt on the ground and said repeatedly, Thank you, Your Highness. Thank you, Your Highness. The Chu family. The middle-aged man helped the violently coughing Grand Tutor Chu back to his room. After a moment of hesitation, he said, Father, why don't you not go out for the next 2 days? You've just recovered from your cold. The doctor said that you should rest well at home. Since it's already begun, it can't be stopped. Grand Tutor Chu covered his mouth and coughed. How has Ping been these days? The middle-aged man sighed. He locks himself in his room every day and doesn't say a word. But this makes me even more worried. Grand Tutor Chu turned to look in a certain direction and murmured, It's my fault. I've restrained him too much in the past. Everyone, let's not be restrained today. We won't go home until we're drunk. At the Chui family banquet, Chui Qingming faced the crowd and laughed. He then raised his cup and downed it in one gulp. Lord Grand Tutor is willing to help us. This time, we definitely won't lose. Lord Grand Tutor is still the best. We usually don't even get to see those great scholars, much less ask them to help us. This time, even His Majesty will have no choice but to agree to recall the King of Shu back to the capital. The letter of the people has been presented. Now, we're just waiting for an opportunity. In these 2 years, the King of Shu's faction had suffered a series of blows. If they didn't do something to raise their morale, they would probably never be able to regain their confidence. And to them, what could be more important than helping the King of Shu return to the capital? Come, Brother Chui, let me toast you. The crowd repeatedly toasted Chui Qingming. Although he was the second son of the Chui family, during this period of time, the family head, Chui Qingze, had been depressed. Chui Qingming made all the decisions in the Chui family. Although he wasn't the family head, he was no different from the family head. In a corner of the banquet, Tsing Shichen turned to look at someone beside him. Why aren't you drinking? Chen Chong shook his head. This wine doesn't have any taste. I think so too. Tsing Shichen smiled and picked up a purple clay teapot. They drink wine, we drink tea. Qin family. After dinner, Qin Yen raised his head to look at the old man and asked, Lord Father, what Grand Tutor Chu said today? Qin Xiang glanced at the person below, who was engrossed in eating. He shook his head and said, My Qin family will not participate in this matter. Although the brothers of the Qin family who were officials in the court still had countless doubts, since their Lord Father had already spoken, they could only nod. On the way back to the room, the large man asked the Qin family's fifth master in surprise, Fifth master, who is that old man who came to our house today? Why does even the Prime Minister have to bow to him? The Qin family's fifth master explained, that is Grand Tutor Chu. When Lord Father was young, he was also his disciple. The large man still wanted to ask more, but the Qin family's fifth master's footsteps paused. Then, he quickened his pace and walked to the door. Seeing a figure at the door, he asked in surprise, Lord Father, why have you come? I couldn't sleep, so I took a walk. Qin Xiang shook his head and said, It's getting late. You should rest early. The Qin family's fifth master nodded. Qin Xiang turned to leave, but his footsteps paused again. He turned his head and asked, what do you think of the current court? Didn't Father say that the current court has rarely been so clear in decades, and that I shouldn't listen to the nonsense of outsiders? The Qin family's fifth master paused, then said, Moreover, I'm not in the court, so I really can't see clearly. Qin Xiang raised his head to look at the dark clouds covering the night sky, where not a single star could be seen. He sighed and muttered, The sky is about to change. I just can't see clearly. The proud Lolita who had recently come to their house to freeload frequently looked at her dazed husband and reminded him, Sir, the meat in the pot is cooked. Li Yi came back to his senses. Looking at the slightly curled up lamb meat in the pot, he shook his head and said, There's no rush. Let's wait for it to float up. Chapter 888. Led by Grand Tutor Chu, several famous scholars in the capital are no longer just asking for the King of Shu to return and take charge of the Eastern Palace. In the past 2 days, there have been rumors among the officials they influence that you are the sycophant who obstructed the peace talks between the Qi and Jing kingdoms, stirring up a foul atmosphere in the court. Li Yi didn't continue her words. Instead, he asked, Tomorrow is the 13th. How are the preparations going? Mingzi nodded and said, Father has already personally issued the edict. It can be announced at any time. You can arrange the time yourself. Then, she frowned and looked at him. If you really had any ideas, you should have told me in advance. Their target this time is you. Don't always look so indifferent. It doesn't matter if I didn't. Li Yi said somewhat helplessly, the Chu family has been caught red-handed, so we have no choice but to work hard. In terms of influence in the imperial court, all of us combined are no match for that Grand Tutor. If they want to talk, let them talk. We can't shut their mouths. Mingzi was startled. She asked in confusion, what blackmailed the Chu family? The Chu family. Li Yi had just opened his mouth when he suddenly looked at Li Xian, who was standing to the side. He asked, "Is there something on my face?" "No." Li Xian shook his head without hesitation. "Then why do you keep looking at me?" Li Xian shrugged. "Other than you and Emingzu, there are only the two of you here. If I don't look at you, am I supposed to look at myself?" It was one thing to look, but to look for an hour and mumble while looking was quite abnormal. He glanced at Li Xian and said to Emingzu, "Let's go over there and talk." On the bustling streets of the capital, the goddess of Luo Shui tilted her head and looked at Li Yi. She asked in confusion, "Where are we going?" Li Yi said casually, "We have nothing to do anyway. Let's just walk around." Xing Zumo looked at him and asked, "Do you remember what day it is today?" Li Yi was puzzled. "April 13th, what's wrong?" "It's nothing." She shook her head and looked ahead. She pointed and said, "There's a new jewelry shop over there. Let's go take a look." The goddess of Luo Shui wasn't in a good mood today. Along the way, she didn't buy anything. She lowered her head and was lost in her thoughts. Only when the two of them were far away from the bustling city and there were fewer and fewer people around them did she finally come back to her senses. She looked around and looked at Li Yi. She asked doubtfully, "Why did we walk here?" Li Yi raised his head and looked at the plaque above the gate, which read, "Zeng Residence." He held her hand and smiled, "Let's go in." Zeng Zumo's body almost subconsciously paused. This used to be the place she was most familiar with, but also the place she was most unfamiliar with. It had carried her sweetest and happiest memories and was also the beginning of the longest nightmare she had ever had. She held Li Yi's hand tightly and looked back at him. Their eyes met for a moment. Then she turned back and let out a long sigh. She nodded and said, "Let's go." The two of them stepped on the stone steps. Li Yi pushed the door open. The heavy wooden door made a creaking sound, revealing a dozen figures behind the door. "Uncle Ho." Xing Zumo looked at the old man who was bowing at the front. After a moment of daze, she looked back with surprise on her face. "Uncle Qi, Nanny Hua, Xiao Mei, you are Xiao Mei. How did you, miss?" The dozen people all bowed. The old man at the front raised his head and said with a smile, "Miss, welcome home." Her mind was blank. Holding Li Yi's hand, she was led into the Zeng residence by him. Only then did she realize that this place was completely different from the last two times she had been here. More than a decade ago, when she was still in the Zeng residence, there should be a stone pavilion on the left side of the garden. Whenever it rained, she didn't want to stay in the stuffy room. She would sit in the stone pavilion, watching the mist in the sky and listening to the pitter-patter of rain. She didn't see the stone pavilion the last two times she came to the Zeng residence. It must have been torn down. This time, it miraculously appeared in front of her eyes. Whether it was in the position or the direction it was facing, it was exactly the same as she remembered. The previous two times she saw a few small houses that didn't exist for more than a decade. They must have been built in recent years. This time, they disappeared as well, and an empty space under the wall reappeared. A long time ago, when the weather was fine, she would play shuttlecock with the maids in the Zeng residence. In the entire Zeng residence, she was the only one who could play shuttlecock without hitting the ground after 100 times. The decoration in the front hall was also very different from the last time. Tables, chairs, screens. These things began to overlap with the Zeng residence in her memory. This was the Zeng residence, the only Zeng residence in her heart. She looked at Li Yi and wanted to ask him something. However, Li Yi had already pulled her into his arms and whispered in her ear, "This is your birthday present. Do you like it?" Only then did she realize what he meant when he asked her, "Do you like it here?" The last time they came to the Zeng family's house, he asked her, "Do you like it here?" She didn't know how he got the Zeng residence from those people. She only knew that this was his birthday present for her, and that was enough. "The imperial edict has arrived." A sharp and piercing voice suddenly rang out from outside. She hurriedly escaped from Li Yi's embrace and saw two fair-skinned, beardless men walking in. The eunuch glanced at them and said coldly, His Majesty has an edict. Kneel and accept it. Whoosh. Other than Li Yi and Xing Zumo, all the servants of the Xing residence knelt on the ground and didn't dare to raise their heads in fear. Xing Zumo was about to kneel as well, but Li Yi grabbed her wrist and glared at the eunuch. The eunuch shivered and immediately put on a smile that was uglier than crying. He quickly said, "Miss, you don't have to kneel. His Majesty specifically said that the court has wronged Sir Zheng. Miss, just stand and listen." He opened the edict and said in a loud voice, "The edict reads, the previous Minister of Revenue, Xing Shiji, was loyal and dutiful. He worked hard and made great contributions. However, he was framed by a villain and the court misjudged him. Now that the investigation has been carried out, we should set things right. Reward the Zheng clan with 10,000 gold and 1,000 bolts of silk. The Zheng clan will be restored. Sir Zheng was wronged and will be posthumously conferred the title of Marquis of Loyalty." After reading it, he looked up anxiously and said, "Miss Zheng, please accept the edict." Seeing that she was standing there in a daze, Li Yi took the edict. The two eunuchs sighed in relief and left immediately. Li Yi held the imperial edict, looked at her, and said in a low voice, "The imperial edict begins with the imperial edict. It is meant to announce to the world that the Xing family was wrongly accused, and the world will return their innocence to them." She looked up with tears in her eyes. This is also your..." Li Yi wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes and said softly, "This is the second gift I'm giving you." As soon as he finished speaking, his lips were kissed by her. It wasn't a light touch like before. Her tongue pried open his teeth. Although the movement was jerky, it was wild and passionate like never before. The servants of the Zheng clan had already left. When Xing Shichen came in, he happened to see this scene. Ahem. After standing there for a long time, he finally couldn't help but cough. Ah. The goddess of Luo Shui was like a frightened rabbit. She pushed Li Yi away in a hurry and clasped her hands together. She said helplessly, "Second uncle." Clang. Xing Shichen felt like he was struck by lightning. The thing in his hand fell to the ground. Chapter 889. Xing Shichen hurriedly picked up a box from the ground and put it on the table. "This is the contract of Steward Ho and the others. From now on, let them stay here." The blush on Xing Zumo's face hadn't disappeared. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at anyone. "Thank you, second uncle." Hearing this title again after so many years, Xing Shichen couldn't hide the joy on his face. He also let out a long sigh of relief. She was willing to call him second uncle, which meant that she had let go of the knot in her heart from 13 years ago. This was also the knot in his heart that he couldn't let go of for a long time. "Then I'll leave first." Xing Shichen looked at them, especially at Li Yi's face, for a long time. He then turned around and left, closing the door on his way out. The Luo Shui goddess still had her head down. Li Yi sat on the chair and pulled her over. "He's gone, let's continue." "Continue what?" The Luo Shui goddess's voice was almost inaudible. Li Yi didn't answer. Instead, he used his actions to tell her what to continue. After an unknown amount of time, she lazily leaned against Li Yi's chest. Her eyes were blurred as she murmured, "Do you still remember what it was like when we first met?" Li Yi grabbed her hand and said, "At that time, I also grabbed your hand like this, and you still thought I was a lecher. You are a lecher." Xing Zumo removed her hand from his waist and said with a blush, "So be it. It's good to be a lecher." Li Yi put his hand back and said shamelessly. She symbolically struggled for a while before letting him be. She murmured, "I still remember that time in the Jadeite courtyard. You rushed up from below the stage and asked me if I had transmigrated from Earth. From then on, I was curious. What is Earth, and what is transmigration?" Now that Li Yi thought about it, he found it a little funny. Not long after he came to this world, he happened to hear someone singing Immortal Magpie Bridge, which only existed in another world. Naturally, he was surprised and happy, but in the end, it was just a misunderstanding. However, if not for that beautiful misunderstanding, there would be no such scene. He couldn't help hugging her tightly and said with a smile, "It's a secret, she grew up here and naturally had an unforgettable feeling for this place." When the two walked out of the room, Lee had already discussed with her. They would go back to Willow Lane to tidy up and move here with Juan and Ruoching in a few days. She had never dared to do something like that before. Moreover, she did it in front of these people whom she had known since she was young. Therefore, after she walked out of the room, she blushed and lowered her head. Especially when she saw Tsing Shichen standing in front of her, even her white and tender neck was covered with a layer of pink. This time, the Chui family's target is not only the king of Shu, but also you. Tsing Shichen glared at him vaguely before saying, "It may not be peaceful in the near future. Be careful." Tsing Zumo looked at Li Yi worriedly and asked, "Are they going to do something bad to you?" Li Yi helped her tidy up her slightly messy hair and said, "Don't worry. Who do you think your husband is? The Chui family is more than 1,000 years too early to make trouble for me. Now is not the time. No matter what happens, it's best to wait and see." Tsing Shichen looked at him and said, "The Chu family's influence is too wide. If you can't kill them in one strike, there will be endless trouble. Now is not the time for you to act." Tsing Shichen said it was not the right time. Li Yi could naturally understand. For example, Grand Tutor Chu's precious grandson had some strange hobbies and was related to the missing girl some time ago. But because he was the grandson of the Chu family, he was secretly let go. If this matter was revealed at a normal time, it would at most affect the Chu family's reputation a little. With Grand Tutor Chu around, the Chu family could still stand tall. However, if he was the happiest person in the Chu clan and used the clan's accumulated reputation to do something, it would be like a sharp blade that could destroy the foundation of the clan. Moreover, if they didn't drag things out, who knew who else would jump out at the crucial moment in court? In a pavilion in the middle of the lake, Li Yi was teaching Yongning how to fish. She had almost completely integrated into this world. After all, she was still young and her worldview had not formed. When she grew older, she probably wouldn't have a clear impression of the other world. "How can you still sit here?" Li Xian walked over from behind and said with a frown, "News just came from the palace. The court is almost in an uproar." Even Uncle Huang was alarmed and went straight to the Great Hall. "You're actually fishing here? Then what can I do?" Li Yi glanced at him and said, "Fight with those old scholars? Won't they have another reason to impeach me? The matter of your impeachment has already been suppressed by Mingzu." Li Xian shook his head and said, "In court, led by Grand Tutor Chu and accompanied by 4 scholars, those people are jointly asking Uncle Huang to issue an edict to transfer the king of Shu back to the capital." Li Yi held Yongning's small hand and helped her stabilize the fishing rod. He then gently pulled it up and a fat carp jumped out of the water. The little girl let go of the fishing rod and shook Li Yi's arm. She said excitedly, "Brother, a fish has taken the bait." Li Yi patted her head and said with a smile, "This fish, I'll make fish soup for Yongning later, in the Great Hall." His Majesty had just lost his temper. The atmosphere in the Great Hall was heavy and deathly silent. Grand Tutor Chu looked up and got up from his chair. Leaning on his walking stick, he moved step by step to the center of the Great Hall. His Majesty's body is unwell. It's best to appoint a crown prince as soon as possible to establish the foundation of the country and settle the hearts of the people. The king of Shu is the son of concubine Chui and is also His Majesty's eldest son. He has a respected status and is in line with the ancestral rules. He is the best candidate to live in the East Palace. He covered his mouth and coughed a few times. He put down his walking stick, cupped his fists and bowed. He said loudly, "Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital." Among the hundreds of officials, 4 white-haired old men walked out and stood behind Grand Tutor Chu. They bowed deeply and said loudly, "Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital." In the Great Hall, many officials looked at each other and walked out. "Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital." "Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital." "Your Majesty, please summon the king of Shu back to the capital." Everyone's voices resounded throughout the hall. Even though there were a few different voices, they were quickly drowned out. Cui Qingming was also in the crowd with a smile on his face. They don't look like courtiers at all. In front of the crowd, Prime Minister Shen's face darkened. He said angrily, "What are they doing? They are forcing the emperor to abdicate." Seeing this, Qin Xiang shook his head with a complicated expression. Emperor Jing slowly rose from his throne and looked down. His gaze finally stopped on Grand Tutor Chu's face. His chest rose and fell slightly as he slowly said, "Grand Tutor, are you forcing us?" "I dare not force your majesty." Grand Tutor Chu lifted his head, his gaze calm. "I'm doing this for the world, for the people of the Jing kingdom, and for his majesty." He tidied up his robe, knelt on the ground, and said loudly, "Your majesty, please issue the decree. Your majesty, please issue the decree. Your majesty, please issue the decree." The sound waves grew louder and louder, as if they were going to overturn the roof of the great hall. Emperor Jing revealed a sorrowful expression. He pointed downwards and murmured, You all." Changde immediately stepped forward and said anxiously, "Your majesty, the dragon's body is more important." Mingzu quickly walked over from the side and said, "Bring Imperial Father to rest first." After a few eunuchs accompanied Emperor Jing and left, she walked down the steps and looked at Grand Tutor Chu and asked, "Grand Tutor, how long are you going to kneel for?" Grand Tutor Chu raised his head and said expressionlessly, "As long as His Majesty does not issue the decree, this old man will not get up." Chapter 890. Li Yi and Li Xian were waiting outside the hall. When an imperial physician came out, Li Xian quickly walked over and asked anxiously, "How is Uncle Huang?" The imperial physician sighed and shook his head. Li Xian's expression changed. He grabbed his collar and asked, "Is it serious?" "Why do you say that, Your Highness?" The imperial physician was surprised and said, "His Majesty was just temporarily stimulated. His mood was too unstable, causing his condition to relapse." Li Xian relaxed and glared at him. "Then why did you shake your head just now?" "My neck was a little stiff just now, so I moved it a little." The imperial physician sighed and then said, "However, you still have to pay more attention in the future. His Majesty's condition really can't take any more stimulation. Get out, get out, get out." Li Xian kicked the imperial physician's buttocks and waved his hand impatiently. After the eunuch reported, the two entered the hall. Emperor Jing was lying on a soft couch inside and waved at them from a distance. Li Xian quickly walked over and said, "Uncle Huang, the dragon's health is more important. You can let Mingzu handle these matters of the court. If they want to kneel, let them kneel until they die in the hall. It will save us some trouble." "What a stupid thing to say." Prince Ning glared at him and said, "If the current Grand Tutor of the court kneels until he dies in the Golden Hall, how will the world talk about His Majesty?" "I don't mind." Emperor Jing shook his head and looked at Li Yi. He said, "You have been wronged. What you have done is beneficial to the country and the people. It is a good deed that will last for generations, but you are regarded as a sycophant." Li Yi looked at Emperor Jing's pale face and said, "Whether it is a good deed or a bad deed, the future generations will judge. Moreover, the people are not stupid. They can't be toyed with as they like. I believe that the world will naturally give me justice." Seeing the fatigue on his face, Li Xian stood up and said, "Uncle Huang, please rest well. We won't disturb you any longer." After leaving the hall, the smile on Li Xian's face immediately disappeared. He said angrily, "Are these old fellows trying to force me to abdicate and rebel?" Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and said, "You just can't stay calm when something happens. Don't worry, let's go and take a look first." In the main hall, Emperor Jing covered his chest and coughed a few times before slowly saying, "I can feel that I don't have much time left." Pain appeared in King Ning's eyes. "Imperial brother," Emperor Jing looked out of the hall. After a long time, he said, "At first, I also thought that you should take this position." Without waiting for him to finish, Prince Ning immediately bowed. "Imperial brother, you must not do this. We know that you don't want to be trapped in this position." Otherwise, the one lying here right now would be you. Emperor Jing narrowed his eyes slightly and said, in the end, this world should belong to those young people. Prince Ning nodded and said, Mingzhu and Xian did not disappoint us. The Cui family has the ambition of wolves. Emperor Jing looked at Prince Ning again. This time, I'm afraid you will have to personally go back to Qing and Fu. Prince Ning bowed and said in a low voice, as you command. When Li Yi and Li Xian walked to the main hall, they coincidentally ran into Mingzhu coming out from inside. She asked, what's the situation inside? Mingzhu shook her head and said, with Grand Tutor Chu as the leader, there are more than 20 people still kneeling inside. Li Yi walked into the main hall and saw that other than the group of people kneeling on the ground, the other officials had already left. The elder at the very front was kneeling on the ground. He must be the Grand Tutor Chu that he had met twice. He walked to the front. Grand Tutor Chu heard the sound of footsteps and slowly raised his head. Li Yi hurriedly waved his hand and said, Grand Tutor, there is no need to be so courteous. Please rise, I really cannot accept such a great courtesy from you. How dare you? How dare you? Before Grand Tutor Chu could speak, a series of harsh voices came from behind him. The 4 scholars looked at him angrily. The officials of the court behind him all shrank their necks and did not say a word. Grand Tutor Chu's expression was calm as he lightly said, I kneel for the world and the ancestral system. When the emperor is ill, the Eastern Palace should be established to stabilize the court and the people. This is the rule set by the ancestors. Do you really want to be a treacherous official who disregards the ancestral system and causes trouble for the world? Such a heavy crime, this junior can't afford to bear it. Li Yi shook his head and bent down. In a small voice, he said, I am only worried that your grandson, a young man in the prime of his youth, will injure his legs if he kneels for too long. Grand Tutor, you are already so old. If something bad happens to you and you collapse, I presume that official Cui, who does not wish to reveal his name, will be very sad. The old man looked at him and his gaze suddenly froze. What did you say? Li Yi looked at him and asked, forming a clique for personal gain and pressuring the emperor in the Golden Palace. Is this the righteousness that Grand Tutor, as a scholar of the Jing Kingdom? Grand Tutor Chu's gaze slightly froze. He coldly said, my righteousness is not for you to judge. Grand Tutor's reputation is illustrious. Naturally, I cannot judge. Li Yi once again lowered his voice and slowly said, I wonder if those women who have been trampled upon by your grandson, who have been seriously injured in both body and mind, can be judged. You. Grand Tutor Chu's expression changed. He stood up shakily with the help of his walking stick and pointed it at Fan Xian. In a trembling voice, he said, You traitor, don't you dare sully the Chu family's clean name. The Chu family's clean name for 100 years is not easy to obtain. Grand Tutor, please reconsider. Don't casually use it to gamble. Li Yi shook his head and turned to leave. The people in the hall looked at the dazed Grand Tutor Chu and looked at each other. An old man finally could not help but ask, Grand Tutor. Grand Tutor Chu waved his hand and said, Get up. We will discuss this matter at length when we return. Watching the people leave the hall from afar, Li Xian asked in confusion, What did you say to that old man? Li Yi watched the group leave and said, I told him that the old man's body is weak and that kneeling for too long is not good for his health. That's all? What else? Li Yi shook his head and said, This is for his own good. If he still does not listen, then he can only blame himself. Li Xian shook his head and said resolutely, Impossible. That old man is as stubborn as a rock. Let alone kneeling until his legs are broken, even if he kneels to death, he will not easily compromise. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Fine. Actually, I told him that His Highness said that if they do not get up, they will all be beheaded and hung at the palace gates as lanterns. The Chu family will be exterminated, the men will be exiled and the women will be sold to the brothels. They will not be allowed to sleep without receiving 100 customers a day. Just ask him if he is afraid. Li Xian was stunned and murmured, Isn't this too cruel? Li Yi patted his shoulder again and said, if you are not so cruel, they will not be afraid. Outside the palace gates, Cui Qingming slowly followed behind Grand Tutor Chu and said, "Don't worry, Grand Tutor. All the evidence of that incident has already been destroyed. What he said is nothing more than slanderous slander and framing others. No matter what he does now, even if he finds those women and points them out, people will only think that he is desperate and will not be able to do anything." His eyes flickered and he said firmly, "Now that the situation has been decided, as long as Grand Tutor puts in a little more effort, the great event will be possible." Chapter 891. Jingdu had always been a troublesome place, but too many things had happened in recent days. First, a fugitive killed someone on the Lantern Festival in a cruel way. Then, a woman near Jingdu disappeared inexplicably. The wanted poster of the fugitive had been posted all over Jingdu, but there was no result until now. The case of the missing woman was solved, but it was not perfect. 2 other women had not been found. Later, the envoy of the Qi kingdom came from afar to negotiate for peace. It was publicized quite enthusiastically for 2 days, but there was no news about it after that. In the middle of April, it was said that led by the Grand Tutor and several famous scholars forced the emperor to issue an edict to summon the king of Shu, the eldest son of the emperor, back to Jingdu and live in the East Palace. Everyone knew why the king of Shu was expelled from Jingdu at that time. If he had taken another step forward, it would have been a great crime equivalent to rebellion. Merely being expelled was already a mercy beyond the law. It was said that on that day in the hall, His Majesty was so angry that his old illness relapsed. The Grand Tutor and the others knelt in the hall and refused to get up. They did not know what happened after that. In any case, the imperial edict to summon the king of Shu back had not been issued. However, it was faintly heard that the Grand Tutor Chu and those scholars were going to carry out some activities to clean up the side of the emperor, aiming at the Minister of Honor, Li Yi, County Marquis Li, who was the most favored by the emperor. Everyone knew that County Marquis Li and the princess had done a lot of good things for the world and helped many people live a good life. However, this kind of thing was planned by the scholars in the upper class. They couldn't participate in it at all. Of course, they wouldn't participate in it. After all, this matter was led by the Grand Tutor, who was like a saint in the hearts of the people. Even those who were very firm in heart couldn't help but be shaken when thinking of this. This was a game between the bigwigs, and they could only watch from afar. What was strange was that no matter how the opponents slandered, County Marquis Li didn't do anything, which made it difficult for countless people to guess. After all, this matter didn't only involve himself. Even the officials and forces in Jingdu who had some relations with him were greatly affected because of this matter. In the government office of the capital, County Magistrate Lu was having a headache because of a street fight. Fighting was just a small matter, but when the people involved in the fight, one was a member of the Cui family, and the other was just a commoner, and the Cui family was not in the right, the matter was a little difficult to deal with. In front of the hall, an old man revealed a smile and said, "Hee, Lord Lu, how should this case be judged? Please quickly give us a definite answer. My young master will have a banquet in a while." County Magistrate Lu couldn't remember when was the last time someone talked to him like this in the court. Could it be that this housekeeper of the Cui residence thought that since Lord Li was at a disadvantage, the Cui family could be more arrogant in the capital? He looked at the disdainful young man standing in the middle of the hall, waved his hand and said, "Fighting in the street, disregarding the law. You will be punished with 10 strokes of the cane and driven out of the county government." In the court, the young man's expression changed, and he shouted, "How dare you!" The old man was startled, and his face also became gloomy. He said in a low voice, "Lord Lu, don't forget who my young master is, and don't forget who you are. What a coincidence. I'm not afraid of threats at all, especially threats from your Cui family." County Magistrate Lu smiled and said, "This man disturbed the court and dared to threaten me. For the sake of your age, I won't beat him. Just throw him out as well." Seeing the government runners drag the 2 people out, the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He clenched his fists, looked at the sky, and murmured, "Lord Li, what are you thinking?" His face alternated between doubt, hesitation, worry, and fear. After a while, all kinds of complex emotions turned into determination. He walked out of the hall and ordered a government runner, "Prepare the carriage, I need to go out." Shawning, "Move a little to the right, hold Yongning, hold her, not her head." "Never mind, put your hand on her shoulder." Li Yi instructed the proud Lolita, and then picked up the brush again, and drew on the spread paper. The weather was good today, and he originally planned to draw a family portrait. Rui was holding Li Duan, Xiao Huan and Rui were standing on her side, and finally he would Photoshop himself, and this family portrait would be perfect. However, the proud Lolita came over, and she insisted on joining in. With her, of course, Yongning, so the small family became a big family. The little guy couldn't stay quiet for long. After a while, he started to cry and make a fuss. Rui had to coax him. Fortunately, her part had been finished. As long as he added others, it would not be difficult for him. After finishing the painting, he sent the proud Lolita and Yongning to play, and then he had time to lie in the yard, enjoying a moment of peace. Not long after he closed his eyes, a pair of hands appeared on his shoulders, gently massaging him. Rui's voice was soft, "I've heard about the things that are spreading outside." Li Yi opened his eyes and asked in surprise, "What is it?" "They say that hubby is a sycophant," Li Yi sighed and said, "I thought I hid it well, but I never expected them to see through me. In fact, from a certain point of view, old man Chu and company were right. At the very least, he had hidden the fact that he wanted to make Princess Royal Empress from the old emperor. If one were to really think about it, compared to this treasonous matter, what the Chui family did was nothing." Rui wasn't surprised by his words. After some thought, she said solemnly, "If hubby is a sycophant, then I'm the wife of the sycophant. When the sycophant and his wife join forces, there's no one to be afraid of." Li Yi grabbed her hand and said with a smile, "Don't worry. One sycophant is enough to deal with these people. The sycophant's son is crying again. It's best you coax the sycophant's wife." Rui went to coax the restless Li Duan. Mississippi Lu walked over from behind and stood in front of him. She looked down at him and asked, "How much longer are you going to wait?" Lying on the recliner to look at Mississippi Lu, he felt like he was looking up at her. Li Yi shook his head and said, "Those are all great Confucian scholars. In terms of influence, I can't compare to them. I have an idea. Rui, why don't you visit those stubborn old fogies one by one at night? You don't have to beat them to death. All you have to do is beat them until they are paralyzed and unable to take care of themselves. That way, they won't be able to run around stirring up trouble." "All right." Mississippi Lu simply agreed. The next moment, she disappeared in front of Li Yi. Suddenly losing sight of Mississippi Lu, Li Yi was startled. He immediately jumped up from the rocking chair and chased after her. He shouted, "Wait a minute. Let's discuss it again. Maybe there's another way." He didn't catch up with Mississippi Lu. Instead, he saw Li Xian and the eldest princess who came together. When the three of them walked back in, someone also came out from another high door. A middle-aged man said apologetically, "Prime Minister Qin, I'm really sorry. My father hasn't been feeling well recently and is resting in bed. He won't see anyone." Prime Minister Qin looked at the two carriages parked in front of the Chu residence. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the middle-aged man and said lightly, "I have something to say. Tell the Grand Tutor that Qin Wen is grateful for his teaching back then. But today, he wants to destroy the pillar of the Jing kingdom." "I beg to differ." Inside the hall, Li Yi had just asked Li Xian and the eldest princess to sit down. Before the tea was served, Fang walked in from outside and said, "Marquis, Lord Seng is here. Seng Shichen should be here soon." Li Yi nodded and said, "Invite him in." Seng Shichen was wearing casual clothes today. When he walked into the hall, he looked up and was stunned at first. Then, he immediately bowed and said, "Seng Shichen greets the princess and the crown prince." Chapter 892. As though he hadn't expected the princess and the crown prince to be present, Seng Shichen lowered his head and drank his tea without saying a word. Li Xian glanced at him and raised his brows. Sir, is there something you need? Li Yi waved his hand and said, ignore Lord Tseng for now. Speak your mind. Li Xian looked at him before looking at Tseng Shichen. He seemed to understand something before he frowned and asked, you actually asked me what I need? Don't you know why we're here? Li Yi shook his head. Why? Let me make this clear. If the Academy of Sciences runs out of funds, don't look for me. Look for Mingzu to borrow it. My family has high expenses. She can't even spend her money. Purge the emperor's side. Li Xian slapped the table and said, that old man Chu has taken the lead to purge the emperor's side on behalf of Uncle Huang. He wants to get rid of the sycophants, but you're still sitting here drinking tea? He said angrily, although old man Chu is respected and the Chu family has an extraordinary influence in the world of officials, making it nearly impossible to find any flaws, you can't just sit here and wait for death. It's not like I can't find any flaws. Tseng Shichen put down his teacup, looked at Li Xian, and said, Your Highness, you may not know this, but in the case of the missing woman case that was solved a few days ago, Grand Tutor Chu's grandson was captured on the spot at the Peng residence. It was only because someone exerted some influence that the case was left unsettled. Li Yi and Mingzu didn't look surprised. Instead, it was Li Xian who was taken aback. He stood up abruptly and asked, something like that happened? Tseng Shichen nodded. When he saw Li Yi and the princess's expressions, he knew that the Chui family had been too naive the previous time. Even if he didn't say anything, he wouldn't be able to hide it from them. Li Xian frowned as he paced around the hall. He muttered, but this alone isn't enough to topple the Chu family. It won't be a good thing if we anger old man Chu. That old fellow even said something about scholarly bones. What bullsh asterisk t scholarly bones? What if we add a murder case? Tseng Shichen stood up and said, unfortunately, the murder at the Miaoying Pavilion on the night of the Lantern Festival is also related to that young Master Zhu. That murder case had caused an uproar in the capital, but it had still not been solved. Li Xian also had some impression of it. He asked, what do you mean? Didn't you say that the criminal originally wanted to harm the grandson of Grand Tutor Chu as well? You mean that the case was originally done by that person surnamed Chu? Li Xian walked up to him and asked, if that's the case, why hasn't there been any news at all? That's because the capital governor, Tseng Shichen, with the tacit approval of Grand Tutor Chu, concealed the truth of the case and framed a fugitive who was on the run. In addition, that woman's older sister felt that there was something fishy about the case and went to the capital governor's yamen to seek justice. To this day, she is still imprisoned in the yamen. Li Xian was startled. Confusion and shock appeared on his face. He pointed at him and said, aren't you Tseng Shichen? Tseng Shichen straightened his clothes and knelt down in the direction of the eldest princess. In a loud voice, he said, I have sinned. You. Li Xian pointed at him and was so shocked that he couldn't say anything. In the end, he could only choke out, you traitor, you betrayed me well. So that's why you locked that woman up. Li Yi stood up as well. He looked at him and asked, why didn't you tell me about this before? Tseng Shichen raised his head and slowly said, the time has not come. Mingzu gazed at him and asked, do you know what the crime is? Tseng Shichen lowered his head and said, no matter what the crime is, it's still much better than following the Chui family down a dead end. Mingzu looked at him and waved her hand. Stand up and talk. After listening to Tseng Shichen's words, Her Highness shook her head and said, no wonder. No wonder he was so radical. Grand Tutor Chu had no other way to protect the Chu family's reputation. Li Xian slammed the table and said angrily, the Chui family actually used such despicable methods. Why didn't they tell old Chu about this? Tseng Shichen shook his head and said, the Chu family can no longer turn back. Whether it was the Chui family's scheme or not, the case was committed by Chu Ping. The Chui family has been uninvolved from the beginning. It's impossible to topple such a powerful family with just one side of the story. Moreover, the capital is deep. The Chui family is not as simple as the crown prince appears to be. Qin He. A trace of doubt appeared on Li Yi's face. His lips moved slightly before he looked at Xing Shichen and asked, "How is the victim's sister now?" Xing Shichen said, "In order to prevent the Chui family from silencing her, I have kept her in prison. But this time, if she is released, she can no longer sound the grievance drum of the capital Yamen." "Young master, Louis Zhang from the Ministry of Justice is here." Fang came in from outside, feeling puzzled. What was going on today? It wasn't a holiday, but everyone was running home. Xing Shichen looked back and said, "I'll go back first. If anything happens, I'll get someone to contact you." Li Yi nodded and waved at Fang. He said, "Send Lord Xing out through the back door." Lord Li, after Louis Zhang entered, he first bowed to Li Yi. Just as he was about to speak, a voice rang in his ear. "Do you only have eyes for Lord Li?" Louis Zhang was startled. When he saw the two people behind Li Yi, he immediately bowed and said, "Greetings, Your Highness, Crown Prince." When he looked up again, his mouth opened, but he didn't know if he should speak. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "It's fine. The princess and crown prince are on the same side. Tell me, how's the investigation of the case?" Louis Zhang nodded and said, "The two missing women have been confirmed to have nothing to do with the Peng family. In the process of investigating the case, I unexpectedly found that the number of missing women in the capital region in the past 2 years has far exceeded the previous years. But the places where they went missing before were relatively scattered, involving more than a dozen counties. The number of missing people in each county is not large, but if you add them up, it is an extremely terrifying number." Li Yi frowned slightly. "There are so many people, but there's no clue at all?" Louis Zhang shook his head and said, "All the clues were inexplicably cut off after extending to the capital. Until now, there has been no useful discovery, and there is no direct evidence that these are related to the Chui family." Li Xian looked at him in surprise and asked, "You suspect that the Chui family is also involved in the business of abducting women and selling women?" "I don't know." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Whether or not it has anything to do with the Chui family, we should always try our best to find the two missing women. Otherwise, this case will not be over." He turned his head to look at Louis Zhang and said, "You continue to follow up on this case. Then this subordinate will go back first." Louis Zhang nodded. After a few steps, a trace of hesitation appeared on his face. He then turned his head and said, "My lord, you can deal with those rotten scholars with all your strength. There is no need to pay attention to the Chui family." Li Xian looked at Louis Zhang's back as he left, then turned his head and said, "Why do I feel that there is a hidden meaning in his words?" Li Yi looked at him in surprise. "You can hear the hidden meaning in his words?" Without waiting for Li Xian to reply, Fang walked in with a surprised expression. He looked at Li Yi and said, "Young master, someone has come again. It is the old man called Prime Minister Qin who came last time." Li Xian and Mingzhu looked at each other. The regent eldest princess was together with the country's traitor, which was rumored to be the talk of the outside world. It was not good for the prime minister to see it. Mingzhu looked at him and walked behind a screen with Li Xian. The white-haired old man stepped into the hall and said, "Young people are indeed fearless. The outside world is like a tide of rumors, yet you are still able to sit still." Li Yi stood up and cupped his hands. "Prime Minister Qin, please sit." "All right, I won't be sitting. I've only come here today to bring a message to you." Prime Minister Qin stood at the door and looked at him calmly. He said, "Stick to what you think is right. There are still many discerning people in the court. They will not watch everything you and Her Highness have done for these countries be destroyed in the hands of those with ulterior motives. Although I am old, with my old bones, I can still block them for you young people." He said one sentence, and only one sentence. After that, he turned around and left. It had to be said that Li Yi used to have some misunderstandings about the old man in front of him. However, some things that happened later changed his impression of Prime Minister Qin. Regardless of the Qin family, Prime Minister Qin was an old man who lived a pure life. He was an old man worthy of admiration. He watched Prime Minister Qin's figure disappear and Fang's big face appeared in front of him again. Fang's face showed an extremely puzzled expression. Young master, what festival is it today? Li Yi looked at him and asked, who is here? Old Lu of the county government. Chapter 893. County Magistrate Lu must have had a hard time these days. He must have been under a lot of pressure from all sides. Have a seat, Lord Lu. After he walked into the hall, Li Yi stretched out his hand and turned to Fang, go make a cup of tea for Lord Lu. County Magistrate Lu sat down uneasily. Seeing the tea cups on the table, he was slightly stunned. There were some guests just now. Mingzhu and Li Xian didn't come out from behind the screen, and Li Yi didn't explain too much. He looked at County Magistrate Lu and said, Lord Lu, I've troubled you these days. Lord Li, please don't say that. County Magistrate Lu hurriedly stood up and cupped his hands, saying, without Lord Li, there would be no me, Lu Dio, today. I can still distinguish some things. Li Yi smiled and asked, Lord Lu, did you encounter some difficulties today? Could it be that someone from above is pressuring you? County Magistrate Lu smiled carelessly and said, I'm the magistrate of the capital city, the magistrate of His Majesty and the common people. Other people and other things have nothing to do with me. He looked at Li Yi and asked, I wonder if Lord Li still remembers this lowly official's friend? Li Yi was stunned. He thought for a moment and asked, Lord Lu, are you talking about the friend of the single-eyelid parents? Lu Dio nodded and said, yes. Obviously, old Lu hadn't completely let go of this matter. Li Yi picked up the teacup and took a sip, indicating him to continue. He looked solemn and asked, Lord Li, I'll ask you again, is it really impossible for parents with single eyelid to give birth to children with double eyelid? Li Yi shook his head and said, I know it may be hard for Lord Lu to accept this matter, but this is indeed the law of nature, which has almost never changed since ancient times. County Magistrate Lu looked at Li Yi with hesitation on his face again. Finally, he made up his mind and said, to be honest, the person I'm talking about is not my friend. He had used this trick countless times, but he never thought that the person was a friend of County Magistrate Lu. Li Yi put down the teacup, sighed and said, in fact, I have known it for a long time. This time, it was County Magistrate Lu's turn to be shocked. He looked at Li Yi and asked in disbelief, Lord Li, you also know that the King of Shu is not His Majesty's biological son? He finally breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. If Lord Li had failed in the confrontation with the Chui family, his fate would not have been any better. Losing his official hat would have been a light punishment, and he might even have been killed. However, this matter was too important, and his life could be in danger at every turn. If it wasn't for his trust in Lord Li, unless it was a matter of life and death, he would definitely bury this secret in his heart forever. Unexpectedly, Lord Li had already known about this matter. What did you say? Li Yi looked at him in a daze and asked, isn't your friend with single eyelids you? County Magistrate Lu was surprised and said, how could my friend be me? You mean, His Majesty. Li Yi reached out a hand and motioned him to stop talking. He rubbed the area between his eyebrows and tried to recall something in his mind. The old emperor had single eyelids, which was right. The King of Shu had double eyelids, which he also remembered very clearly. Imperial concubine Shui, Imperial concubine Shui. The key was Imperial concubine Shui. He had only met Imperial concubine Shui a few times, and most of the time was at night, so he really couldn't remember clearly. Clang. The screen on one side of the lobby fell to the ground, making a heavy sound. Seeing the two people coming out from behind the screen, County Magistrate Lu trembled and his legs suddenly became a little weak. Your Highness. Li Yi stood up and looked at Mingzhu, who was walking over, and asked, do you remember whether Imperial concubine Shui has double eyelids or single eyelids? Mingzhu's expression was a little absent-minded. After a moment, her eyes focused again. She looked at him and said slowly, in the Jing Kingdom, double eyelids are considered beautiful. Imperial concubines are also required to have double eyelids. At that time, the Chui family was powerful in the imperial court. Only they could make an exception to send a woman with single eyelids into the palace and promote her to the position of imperial concubine. Li Yi didn't quite understand those people who would cut their bodies for double eyelids. Single eyelids and double eyelids had their own beauty. He didn't expect that the imperial concubines with single eyelids would be discriminated against in the selection of imperial concubines. It really shouldn't be, however. The key point of the problem now was not the problem of discrimination at all. It was a big problem. How could it be? How could it be? Li Xian shook his head repeatedly. The imperial palace was so strict and the imperial concubine was so noble. How could she do such a thing? Moreover, neither the Chui family nor imperial concubine Chui had any reason to do so. A hint of anger appeared on Li Xian's face as he said, "The Chui family has committed a heinous crime. They have committed such a heinous crime, yet they are still stirring up trouble in the imperial court. I must report this matter to Uncle Huang." No. No. Li Yi and Emingzu spoke almost at the same time. You. Li Xian stared at them with his eyes wide open. Why? This matter was related to the reputation of the imperial family. It was a crime punishable by extermination. Once it was investigated, not only the Chui family, but anyone who had anything to do with the Chui family would not be able to escape. Those people had forced the emperor to summon the king of Shu back to the capital. They had become traitors who wanted to steal the country. It was good enough that they could protect themselves. How could they still be in the mood to clean up the side of the emperor? Mingzu didn't bother to pay attention to him. Li Yi glanced at him and asked, "What do you think His Majesty will do if he hears such news in his current condition?" Li Xian heard this and immediately fell silent. There was no doubt that if Uncle Emperor knew about this, the Chui family would definitely be destroyed. A large number of people in the capital would also die. But what about Uncle Emperor himself? The imperial physician had repeatedly warned that Uncle Emperor's body could no longer be stimulated. If he knew that the Chui family and imperial concubine Chui had done such a thing, the consequences would be unimaginable. We can't let Uncle Emperor know about this. Li Xian nodded and said, "What about you? If you let the Chui family go, how will you deal with those people?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "You don't have to worry about this matter. I have my own way." Li Xian looked at County Magistrate Lu and suddenly said, "This matter is related to the reputation of the imperial family. Even if we have to investigate it, we can't make it public. The fewer people who know about it, the better." Li Yi sighed and also looked at County Magistrate Lu. He murmured, "Only dead people can keep secrets." County Magistrate Lu's face was pale. He wanted to stand up, but he directly collapsed on the chair. When he walked out of the gate of the Li family, he still felt a little weak in his legs. He looked at the man beside him and said, "Brother Fong, help me a little." Fong held his arm and looked him up and down. He said with some disdain, "Old Lu, you should exercise more, don't keep me guessing." "What's your way?" In the hall, Mingzu frowned and looked at him. She said, "Chu Ping is Chu Ping, and the Chu family is the Chu family. Even if we expose these two cases, we may not be able to shake the Chu family. Don't underestimate the Chu family's position in the hearts of the officials and people. Whether we can shake them or not depends on our skills." Li Yi walked out of the door and said, "But before that, I want to see Wen Gu of the Jing Kingdom." Chapter 894. The capital of the Jing Kingdom was the most prosperous and affluent place in the Jing Kingdom. It was also the holy land in the hearts of scholars in the Jing Kingdom. There were many wealthy families and great scholars here. Countless scholars in the Jing Kingdom flocked to this place. Compared to the places outside the capital region, there were undoubtedly more opportunities here. In the private garden of a famous scholar in the capital, dozens of young scholars were scattered around the garden in groups of 3 to 5, chatting and laughing with each other. Somewhere, a young man in green frowned and said, "No matter how I look at it, Lord Li doesn't look like a treacherous official. Think about it, he has done so much for our Jing Kingdom in the past few years. Even you and I have benefited a lot from him. How did he become a treacherous official?" He has repeatedly tried to stop the king of Shu from entering the capital and obstructed his majesty from assigning the position of the Eastern Palace. He must have some kind of wild ambition. The eyes of the person beside him flashed and he shook his head. You don't even trust the Grand Tutor and the great scholars? Hearing this, the young scholar's face quickly showed hesitation. In other places in the garden, people's conversations were also limited to the matter of purging the emperor's side that had caused an uproar. The king of Shu is the legitimate crown prince. It is in line with the ancestral system and ethical principles. Although the eldest princess is as talented as a man, she is a woman after all. It is not a solution to go on like this. He thinks that he can interfere with the selection of the crown prince by relying on His Majesty's favor. If he isn't a treacherous official, what is? This kind of treacherous official usually doesn't have a good ending. In a pavilion in the garden, two old men were sitting opposite each other and playing chess. After the old man with the white piece put down a piece, he said, Brother Chu has never cared about these court affairs. Why is he so radical this time? Strange, strange. The old man with the black piece picked up a piece and thought for a moment before putting it down. He said, not to mention that Brother Chu is a little strange, the position of the Eastern Palace should not be left empty. It is the right way for the eldest prince to enter the Eastern Palace. How can the court affairs be controlled by a woman for so long, Pa? The old man holding the white chess piece suddenly put down the chess piece and said angrily, Women taking over the government. Her Majesty's move is really stupid. The Women's Union, the Women's College, look at what she has done. What a mess. A few days ago, I visited an old friend. That old friend's granddaughter actually told me that the teachers of the Women's College told them that it was impossible for parents with single eyelids to have children with double eyelids. That's utter nonsense. His Majesty and Imperial Consort Shui both have single eyelids. I've seen the King of Shu with my own eyes. He clearly has double eyelids. His tone was resentful. When I'm done with this part, I'll definitely submit a memorial to the Women's College. Let's focus on the matter at hand first. However, the elder did not pay much attention to what he said. After placing down another black chess piece, he smiled and said, Brother Zhao, you've lost. Although the Xing family's mansion is big, it's not a good idea for you to live here all the time. Li Yi looked at drunken Amo and asked, Why don't you just move over? Whenever you miss this place, you can come back and stay for a few days. She shook her head and said, I won't leave Sister Ruoqing behind. Li Yi comforted her, who said you two should separate. When the time comes, Ruoqing will move over together, and you two can still live together. That's nothing. Even if you agree, Sister Ruoqing won't. She tilted her head and looked at Ruoqing. Don't you think so, Sister Ruoqing? Wan Ruoqing just smiled and did not answer. Li Yi looked at her and said, All right, but the old madam has been talking about you for a long time. Let's pick a time, and I'll take you to see her. Ah, the old madam of the Li family? Her expression immediately became a little flustered. Li Yi nodded and said, If you don't go, I'll have to bring the old madam to see you. This matter. She stood up, and the panic and nervousness on her face were even more obvious. She stammered, I haven't brushed my teeth today. Seeing her run into the room in a panic, Li Yi could only shake his head. He understood her concerns, and it was not good to force her on such a matter. After she left, the smile on Ruoqing's face gradually faded. She looked at him with some worry and said, I've heard the rumors outside. Mrs. Chen also asked me to bring you a message. Don't have a direct conflict with those people. Has the matter really reached such a serious point? Don't worry, it's just a small trouble. It will be solved soon. Li Yi stood up and looked at the closed door. He estimated that it would take a long time for drunken Mo to brush her teeth this time. After saying goodbye to Xiaotsue, he looked at Wan Ruoqing and said, Let's go out for a walk. It was early May, and the weather was not very hot. Out of the Xing mansion, Wan Ruoqing comforted him. Drunken Mo should still be a little worried. I've been persuading her these days. I think after a few days, she will agree to move over. Li Yi tilted his head, looked at her, and asked, What about you? Me? Wan Ruoqing was stunned and said, after all, I've lived here for a long time. I'm still used to Willow Lane. I'll probably move back there. The house is too big, and it's always a little lonely with only a few people living there. It won't be lonely if there are more people. When walking to the door of the brothel, Li Yi smiled and said, you go in first. I have something to do. In a moment, forget it, let's talk about it later. Wan Ruoqing looked at him and asked, will you come back in a moment? Depends. Li Yi wanted to say that he would see how it went. Seeing her look at him, he swallowed the words that were in his throat and nodded. Come here. On the street, the sloppy old man limped behind him, but his speed was not slow. He shook his head and said, when you're young, you do what you think in your heart. It's better to regret now than to lament when you're old. Li Yi looked at his legs and said, you go to second uncle every day, but you can't beat him. Why bother? What do young people know? The sloppy old man curled his lips disdainfully and said, if I meet Taoist nun again now, I can let her use one hand. Li Yi stopped before the guru finished bragging, because they had arrived at the Chu family. The gatekeeper of the Chu family was very polite. When he saw the young man and the old man, he asked them very politely if they had an invitation. When he learned that they did not, he also politely told them that the Grand Tutor was meeting some old friends today and would not see any guests. If they did not have an invitation, they should come back another day. Li Yi smiled and said, please inform them that I'm here to visit the Grand Tutor. If the Grand Tutor really doesn't want to see us, we can leave. The gatekeeper saw that the young man in front of him was extraordinary. Although the old man behind him was not very agile, his eyes were very scary. He could not figure out their identity and said, wait a minute, I'll go inform them. However, it's not certain whether the Grand Tutor will see you or not. Ning Chen. He murmured the name and quickly ran in. Somewhere in the capital, two figures walked out of a brothel. Hearing the gossip of the people around them, the middle-aged man turned his head and asked the man beside him, some people in the capital say that Sir Li is a pillar of the court and some say that he is a traitor. Wu Er, what do you think? I don't know. I'm not very familiar with Sir Li. The man beside him shook his head, thought for a moment, and said, however, I still think that Sir Li has been wronged. The middle-aged man looked at the crowd and murmured, since he has been wronged, why doesn't he respond to the rumors in the capital and the fights in the court? Wu Er sighed and said, who knows, don't worry. The middle-aged man patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, Sir Li is a hero of his generation. These clowns won't last long in front of him. We have to believe in him. Chapter 895. The Chu family. In the main hall, other than Grand Tutor Chu, there were several elders of similar ages. They all wore loose Confucian robes and had righteous expressions. Their bearing was extraordinary, and they seemed to have a noble character. A thin elder shook his head and said, it's a pity. Although Grand Tutor Wang resigned long ago and the Wang family has always kept a low profile, if he was willing to stand out, the matter would not have been dragged out to this day. Another elder with a serious expression sighed and said, Grand Tutor Wang, I once personally went to invite him, but he tactfully refused. He said that he was old and did not care about the affairs of the court. His words revealed his admiration for that sycophant. Back then, when the envoy of the Qi kingdom caused havoc in the capital, no one in the vast capital dared to fight. Grand Tutor Wang dragged his sick body to court and was persuaded by everyone. You all know what happened next. It's no wonder he was so impressed. It's fine if Grand Tutor Wang doesn't help either side, but isn't this Qin Wen Brother Chu's disciple? This time, he actually joined forces with many important officials in the court to speak up for that sycophant. If not for that, why didn't the officials respond as soon as Brother Chu spoke? The matter has been dragged on for so long. It's not just the officials. I'm afraid that even the common people will have to put in more effort. As they drank tea and discussed, a servant of the Chu family walked in from outside. He walked to Grand Tutor Chu's side and whispered a few words. Ning Chen. Grand Tutor Chu frowned slightly. He had no impression of this person at all. When the gatekeeper saw this, he felt a wave of regret. He hurriedly said, "I'll send them away immediately." "Wait." He quickly walked out of the door, and a voice came from behind him. Grand Tutor Chu looked at him and asked, "You said that he is a young man about the same age as Ping, and that he is handsome and has an extraordinary bearing?" The gatekeeper immediately nodded. "He is handsome and much more handsome than young master." "Ning Chen, sycophant," Grand Tutor Chu murmured. A hint of doubt appeared on his face as he said in a low voice, "Let him in." At the entrance of the Chu family, the gatekeeper ran over and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He respectfully said to Li Yi, "Young master, please come in." Compared to the other rich and powerful families that Li Yi had seen, the Chu residence wasn't very big. In fact, it could even be said to be on the small side. Perhaps it was also because the Chu clan didn't have many descendants, and the 2 generations of the clan only had one son. Too large of a residence couldn't be used, and it would seem deserted. Led by the servant, they did not pass through the main residence, but took a small path to the left. Not long after, they arrived at a small garden. A figure dressed in a gray Confucian robe stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Li Yi wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but he felt that the body of this royal tutor was much hunchier than the last 2 times he saw him. The old man turned his head and asked calmly, "This old man has always been curious. When you saw me on the street that day, why did you hide?" At this moment, Li Yi realized that not only was his back hunched, but his complexion was also much older than before. It was as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. "I was afraid that you would blackmail me," Li Yi said honestly. "Unfortunately, I couldn't escape in the end." The 2 of them had been at loggerheads in the court that day, but when they met again, there was not the slightest atmosphere. The old man looked at him with a sharp gaze and asked, "You repeatedly prevented the eldest imperial son from entering the capital. Do you think that this old man has wronged you?" Li Yi smiled and said, "As for the reason, the royal tutor naturally understands." "Actually, I can understand the royal tutor." Li Yi gazed at the neatly trimmed flower garden to the side and slowly said, "The Chu clan has been a clean stream among the scholars of the Jing kingdom for many generations. They represent righteousness and righteousness. A mere sycophant naturally cannot compare to the Chu clan's century-old reputation." Royal Tutor Chu's expression was calm, but his fists, which were hidden in his sleeves, were tightly clenched. His veins were bulging. "I know that Cui Qingming used some shameful methods to get hold of the Chu clan's weakness." Li Yi shook his head and continued, "Your grandson deserves it, but the Chu clan should not be implicated. Even if the Cui clan exposed those scandals, it will not shake the Chu clan's foundation. Although it will inevitably damage the Chu clan's reputation, it will not be difficult to make up for it in the future." He gazed at Royal Tutor Chu again. "What is difficult is the royal tutor's choice." Royal Tutor Chu stared at him. A moment later, he unclenched his fists and said, "All of this is just your one-sided statement. There is no stain on the Chu clan, and there is no need to make up for it." Li Yi met his gaze for a long time before sighing. He cupped his fists and said, "Since that's the case, royal tutor, this sycophant bids farewell." Just as he was about to walk out of the garden, he stopped and turned back to ask, "Was it worth it?" This time, he did not receive any response from the old man. When he walked out of the Chu household, the unkempt old man saw that his expression was relaxed. There was no hesitation or apprehension from before. He asked in surprise, "What, did you succeed?" Li Yi nodded, "It's done." The unkempt old man was somewhat disappointed along the way. He thought he could watch a great show, but from the looks of it, there wasn't much hope. When he arrived at the entrance of the brothel, he asked again, "How long will I be staying inside today?" "I'll go out for a walk." "I'm not going back today." Li Yi waved his hand. "You can walk as long as you want. Just let me know at home before nightfall." "You're not going back?" The unkempt old man looked at him in surprise and asked, "Are you sure?" Li Yi nodded and stepped into the brothel. Recently, there hadn't been many exciting shows at the brothel. The customers were already beginning to complain. It was time to add something new. He habitually glanced at the small building in front of him and happened to meet a gaze from the window of the loft. Li Yi was startled for a moment, then he smiled and waved his hand towards that direction, then walked over quickly. He's not coming back tonight? The Li family. Mississippi Lu frowned. Where is he? The unkempt old man shrugged. A place to watch a show. Mississippi Lu waved her sleeves. Take me there. Rui grabbed her arm and shook her head. My husband said before he went out this morning that he had something important to do today. He might not come back tonight. What are you going to do? I'm not going to look for him. Mississippi Lu shook her head and said, I'm going to watch a show. In the room above the loft of the brothel. When Li Yi saw Ruoqing writing, she frowned slightly and seemed to be in pain. He asked in confusion, what's wrong? She put down the pen and looked at her fingers. She shook her head and said, maybe I've held the pen for too long these 2 days. There are blisters. Li Yi saw that there was a blister on her fingers. He frowned and said, forget it. Don't write anymore. When I finish writing this chapter, you can tell me how to arrange it and I'll write it down. Li Yi put down the pen and said, I'll help you pop the blister first. You can rest for a while. He took out a sterilized needle. These things were always available here. He held her hand and poked a hole in the blister. He squeezed out the liquid inside but didn't completely pop it. He looked up and asked, does it hurt? No. Ruoqing smiled and shook her head. Li Yi nodded and said, the wound needs to be disinfected. I'll apply some alcohol on it now. It might hurt a little. Just bear with it. Even though she was mentally prepared, when he applied the alcohol, she couldn't help but let out a suppressed cry of pain when she suddenly felt the stinging pain. It hurts. Just bear with it. Mississippi Lu stood outside the door with a livid face. When she heard the woman's suppressed voice, she finally couldn't help but push the door open and enter. Don't touch water these days, and don't write. Li Yi put down the things in his hands and looked at her to remind her. Then he turned to look at Mississippi Lu and asked in surprise, Rui, why are you here? Mississippi Lu glanced around the room and then looked at Li Yi. She said lightly, I'm here to ask you to go home for dinner. Chapter 896. Women were really strange. She said that she wanted to invite him back for a meal, but she left by herself. It was likely that the sloppy elder's girlish heart had run wild and he had forgotten to bring a message back. Time was tight to begin with, so there was no need to waste any more time. Li Yi held a cold steamed bun in his mouth and wrote as he ate. He turned to Wan Ruoqing and said, if you haven't eaten, go out and eat something first. I still need a while to finish. Wan Ruoqing nodded and went out. When she came back again, she was holding a food box in her hand. She looked at Li Yi and shook her head. You can't just eat steamed buns. I bought some porridge. Have some. Li Yi nodded and said, leave it there first. I'll eat it later. He wasn't too hungry. Of course, the most important thing was to hurry up. After leaving the Chu family today, there was no turning back. There was no need to hold back against an enemy. After writing a few words, a gentle voice sounded in his ear. Open your mouth. Li Yi paused and looked back at her. This scene was so familiar. He subconsciously opened his mouth, and she gently placed the spoon in. An interesting play not only needed a brilliant script, but the stage layout, the actors' acting skills, as well as their expressions and lines were all very important. All he could do was the first step. The rest of the more detailed and tedious matters had to be left to professionals like her. After he wrote the first chapter, he discussed these matters with her for more than 2 hours. They discussed from day to night. Li Yi saw the fatigue between her brows and said, I'll write the next chapter. Rest for a while. Wan Ruoqing nodded and didn't refuse. She had been busy until late last night, so she was actually a little sleepy. She still had to discuss the second chapter later, so it was beneficial to take a short rest now. She leaned over the small table by the bed and looked at the flickering candlelight before slowly closing her eyes. Pa! The oil lamp gave off a spark and let out a soft sound. When she slowly opened her eyes, she found that she was lying on the bed, covered with a thin layer of quilt. She got up from the bed and looked in a certain direction subconsciously. There was no one at the table. Has he gone back? The paper spread out on the table should be the finished script. She picked it up and looked at it. It was indeed finished. It was dark outside the window. It was already very late. After tomorrow, she would be busy again, and even busier than before. In order to ensure enough energy, she had to rest early even though she wasn't sleepy. She took off her coat and only wore a dudu. She put it on the cabinet and sat on the bed. Just as she was about to take off her shoes and socks, the door was pushed open from the outside. Usually, only she and Yu Zhu lived in this small building, so the door didn't need to be locked from the inside. She subconsciously thought that it was Xiao Zhu who came in, but when she looked up, her expression froze. You're awake. I was afraid that you would be hungry at night, so I cooked a bowl of noodles for you. Li Yi walked in with a tray and closed the door with his foot. When he heard her explanation, he was also stunned. After a long time, he asked tentatively, why don't you put on your clothes first? I thought you had left. Wan Ruoqing put on her clothes, her cheeks still red. Well, it ended a little earlier than expected. I'll leave right away. Li Yi put down the tray and couldn't help but turn his head to look at her. It was really strange. The new style of underwear had become completely popular in the capital, but whether it was Mississippi Lu, Zoe Mo, or Ruoqing, they all had a special fondness for dudu. It really didn't make sense, this. Did you cook it? Wan Ruoqing looked at the fragrant noodles on the table. In addition to a few green decorations on top of the noodles, there was also a poached egg. She turned to look at him and asked. There is no kitchen here. I went outside deliberately. Li Yi looked at her, shook his head, and said, although it's not good to eat so late, it's my birthday after all. I still have to eat longevity noodles. Wan Ruoqing looked at him and said in a daze, birthday? Li Yi asked helplessly, your birthday is only half a month later than Zoe Mo's. Don't tell me you've forgotten it yourself? Her face was a little red. She sat at the table and ate the noodles. Li Yi walked over and opened the window. In the distant night sky, the first light bloomed. Then there were 2, 10, 100, and countless. Wan Ruoqing held her chopsticks and looked out of the window absent-mindedly. The fireworks illuminated half of the sky. On the street not far from the window, there were countless exclamations. From her direction, he stood at the place where the fireworks were the most brilliant, smiling and waving at her. Li Yi didn't stay out all night. If he really had a long talk with Ruoqing all night, it was very likely that Mississippi Lu would come over in the middle of the night to ask him to go back for dinner. What's more, in the next few days, Ruoqing would be very busy and needed enough time to rest. At the very least, it was not good for a man and a woman to be alone in a room. If it was spread out, it would ruin the girl's reputation. If she couldn't get married in the future, it would be great. Even so, when he returned home, it was after midnight. There was no light in the whole house. Rui and the child should have fallen asleep long ago. He groped his way to the study, but he didn't turn on the light. He walked to the bed, lay down, and slept in his clothes. When he stretched out his hand to pull the quilt, his palm touched a very soft place. He subconsciously squeezed it, and a cold voice seemed to ring in his ear. Take your hand away. It didn't seem like it, but it was. Li Yi turned over and got out of bed. Looking at Mississippi Lu who sat up on the bed, he said in surprise, why are you sleeping here? When he asked this question, he realized that he had asked a nonsense question. Recently, Mississippi Lu had abandoned martial arts for literature. She studied hard every day and even occupied his study. Most of the time, she read until late at night. It was not a difficult thing to understand that she slept here at night. A tiger's butt should not be touched, let alone a tigress' butt. Li hid the hand behind his back and took a few steps back, always alert for sword light beside the bed. When he retreated to the door, he saw that there was no movement beside the bed. He thought for a while and asked again, "If I go to sleep now, I will definitely disturb the child. The guest room is not cleaned. If you sleep here, where should I sleep? Your room?" Finally, there was some movement beside the bed. Mississippi Lou got out of bed. Although Li could feel two eyes in the dark, which made him feel guilty, Mississippi Lou didn't mention what had happened just now. She walked straight past him and left the study. He closed the door and went back to the bed to lie down. A familiar light fragrance lingered in his nose. After being stunned for a while, he murmured, "Is there a difference?" Since the capital entered summer, the weather became hot and dry, and the situation was also restless. In the court, the two forces led by Grand Tutor Chu and Prime Minister Qin had new changes every day. The common people were also affected a lot. Rumors were everywhere. However, County Marquis Li, who was at the heart of the struggle, was as still as a mountain from beginning to end. He didn't make any response or reaction to it, which made everyone puzzled. Of course, although this matter affected the hearts of the common people, the affairs of the court and the debate between loyalty and treachery were too far away from them. It was not an easy choice to believe in the famous Grand Tutor Chu or Lord Li, who had done a lot of good things for the common people. Compared with this matter, the new play that had been promoted in the brothel since a few days ago was obviously much closer to them. That new play had a trial screening in only one brothel in the capital today. Even if the brothel was already full of people, the guests who didn't buy tickets in advance could only stand outside the door and sigh. The spectators who were lucky enough to buy tickets were naturally complacent. In the dark theater, only the lights around the stage were on. They didn't wait long. The stage curtain was opened, and a faintly discernible voice floated into their ears. "Flowers will bloom again, but people will never be young again. There is no need to be rich and powerful. Peace and happiness are immortals." The curtain was completely opened, and an old woman in cotton clothes with a bent body appeared on the stage. The old woman took a few steps forward and introduced, "I'm Granny Kai, from Chuzhou City. We are the family of 3. Unfortunately, my husband has passed away, and he only has one child, who is 8 years older than me. I have 2 children, and my family is quite rich. Here is Scholar Do." The ordinary opening was the original routine of a common play, but because of the overwhelming promotion in the brothel, at this moment, people were still looking forward to the play. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.